spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. So I hope the microphone's working now. It's always a trick with this. There's always something. StreamYard's always acting weird, and my microphone sometimes goes off. And now it seems like everyone can hear me, and my microphone is on. So that's very good. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Now, the way we generally do things is I give my opening remarks, whatever it is that I would like to talk about. Then from there, we do the roll call, and I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And that's all good. And then after that, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. That's the way we generally do things on this channel. So if you got something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a Rumble rant on Rumble or send me a super chat on YouTube. Announcements. First announcement, if you're in the LA area, if you are in Los Angeles, please reach out to me. I've already heard from a number of people, and those emails have been received. I haven't replied to you all yet because I'm waiting for the flyer to be finished. But the flyer with the time and place of the event is getting finished. They're just tweaking it a little bit. And then we're having an event. Looks like it's going to be on the 7th of June at a church in Monterey Park. So I'm just waiting for the details of that to be worked out. I've seen one draft of the flyer. I asked them, or I requested they just change one thing. But it looks like I'm headed to LA. So if you're in the LA area, if you're a CPI member, a CPI friend, ally, viewer, or whatnot, hit me up, and I will make sure that you hear about it. Might be shorter notice than we'd intended, but that's fine. That's how these things are. But I don't often get out to LA. I try to, make my rounds around the country. I was in Oregon in December. I was up in Vermont earlier, and now I'm headed to LA. I'm going to probably be in Chicago at some point this summer. I was in DC last weekend for the Libertarian Convention, where these pamphlets were a smashing success, and I'll tell you more about that as we talk. But I try to get around and make my rounds around the country as we organize and build. So LA looks like next weekend, not this coming weekend, but June 7th or 8th, I'll be in LA. It looks like not 100% confirmed yet, waiting to get the flyer, but it's really looking like it's going to happen. So if you're out in the West Coast in Los Angeles, by all means, send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com, and I will make sure to get back to you when the event is finalized. I've received a number of your emails already, and the event will be announced, and I'll make sure that you get an invitation. And I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be an important event around an important topic, which is peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. So next thing that I wanted to mention is that the Center for Political Innovation has a lot of important operations coming up. We are always looking for new members. We have our weekly Zoom call every Saturday. If you are interested in becoming a member of CPI, you can just join our website. You can join on the website. It's $10 a month, not much. Goes into the CPI official bank accounts. Doesn't go directly to me. I get no paycheck or anything from CPI. It's just the money goes for organizational purposes, and we involve you in our activism and community building. So, always looking for more members of the Center for Political Innovation. You can join on our website, cpiusa.org. So we got that going on. So yeah, tonight I'm going to give some important remarks about a lot of things. So as I said before, I'll be answering super chats in the second half of the show. Rumble rants, super chats in YouTube, Rumble rants on Rumble. If you have something you want me to talk about, by all means, send it in. So I'm just going to jump right into it. The remarks tonight, the remarks tonight are going to be very important, and I'm going to hit a lot of important concepts. So let me just jump into it. One of the problems that I had in preparing tonight's remarks was that, when you are giving an educational presentation, and generally it's important to have just one or two or maybe three at the most major points. And the reason for that is that not everyone will follow if you do more points than that. And that if you want your presentation to be entertaining, if you want your presentation to hold your audience, to speak to people, it's generally good to make two or three, usually just one, but sometimes two or 3 points, and make them in different ways, tell different stories, illustrate them with different examples. That's the way you should do things. You make 1 or 2 key points, and your audience hears them. They learn those points. You hit them in different ways to hit different people who might be listening. Some examples might speak to different people, and that's generally how you give an educational presentation. That is not what I'm going to do tonight, because unfortunately, many of the points that I'm going to talk about tonight are relevant to other points. You have to understand the first point before you understand the second point. You have to understand the second point before you understand the third point. The knowledge that we have as a community is very much built on other knowledge. And that makes it very difficult because we want anybody, right? These streams are public. We want anybody, any random person who might tune into this channel, to be able to listen to what I'm saying here and learn from it. And that can make it difficult when you have points that build on other points. It can make it very, very difficult, actually. But that's just something we're going to have to do. So I'm going to make a number of points tonight, and those points are going to build on each other. And I'm going to get you to understand what's going on. And I'm going to make these points, and I'm going to explain my perspective, and I'm going to get you to understand what we are trying to accomplish with our organization, CPI, and what our organizational goals are, and why we are actually in a very, very good spot. And people may not realize that, and our political opponents may not realize that, and others may not realize that, and things may not be very, very apparent. There's a lot of things that are not very apparent that are true. And sometimes it can be very frustrating to look at the present circumstances because things don't seem obvious. And there's certain phrases and certain quotations and cliches that I have often tried to avoid using. You hear general Marxists and communists use these quotes, and I've tried to avoid them because I've seen them abused. I've seen them used by opportunists. There's one phrase, one quote from Vladimir Lenin that is very frequently used. He says, "There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen." Now, that quote is used pretty often, and I have made a point of not using that quotation because of the fact that that quotation is generally used by opportunists. It is used by the leaders of some of the tiny little communist groups that exist to justify their complete failure. Right? They're not growing, they're not expanding, they're not gaining more influence among the population, they're not becoming more relevant. But if somebody asks them about it, they'd say, "Oh, well, don't you know, it'll all be okay when the revolutionary situation arises. There's decades where nothing happens, but then there's weeks where decades happen. It'll all be fine." And we don't want to have that attitude because we know that those groups are not going to rebound. They're not going to spring back into becoming the vanguard. And that those quotes are used to cover up the inadequacy of these organizations. And so I try to avoid using those quotes. And there's a number of these that are used to say, look, we're not gaining influence, we're not growing now, but that's okay because when the time is right, everything will just fall into place. And that is a flim flam that opportunistic leaders of failing and dying communist organizations use in order to cover up for their failures in the present. Sure, we're not growing. Sure, we're not expanding. But, what did Lenin say about years and weeks and decades or whatever? So just be fine with it. Just accept that. And I don't want to do that. And in fact, the whole point of the Center for Political Innovation, right? We're CPI, Center for Political Innovation. The I is for innovation. It means that the way people have been operating politically in the United States for a very long time isn't working and doesn't make sense. And that's true on a number of different levels. For one, the liberals are more pro-war than the conservatives are. It used to be that the liberals were the anti-war people. When Ronald Reagan was going to bomb a country, the liberals and the hippies went out to protest against it. Conservatives loved the military and they loved bombing, and it was liberals and hippies that talked about the military industrial complex, etc. But now it's the opposite. Donald Trump became president and was president for 4 years because he ran on a platform of ending foreign wars. And I just saw Donald Trump speak at the Libertarian Convention, where he bragged about how he started no new wars. He bragged about negotiating with North Korea. He bragged about how he was going to end the conflict in between Russia and Ukraine. And as soon as he got into office, there would be a peace treaty. And he's a Republican. Another thing, it used to be that it was conservatives that loved the FBI and liberals that opposed it. Right? The FBI was seen as this heavy-handed police agency that threatened Martin Luther King, that violated people's civil liberties. And it was, it was conservatives that loved the FBI, thought the FBI was great, going after those commies, going after those black radicals. And it was liberals who thought the FBI was potentially a threat to their civil liberties, thought the FBI, might be violating our right and spying on us and violating us. Well, now it's conservatives who see that the FBI is dangerous, who think that the FBI conspired against Donald Trump, who think that the FBI is, out of control and staged the January 6th events. And now it's conservatives that oppose the FBI. And you saw when Donald Trump was president, he removed FBI Director James Comey. So the liberals support the FBI, and the conservatives oppose it, or at least say they oppose it. The liberals support regime change wars. The conservatives say they oppose it. That right there tells you that everything is off. But it gets even more complicated, because around the world, the United States is still trying to overthrow various governments. And the governments that the United States is trying to overthrow generally have some kind of socialist planned economy. However, the people trying to overthrow them tend to be people that are liberals. And they tend to try and destabilize and overthrow these socialist governments in the name of LGBT rights, in the name of abortion and women's rights. And these governments that are socialistic and have centrally planned economies, they tend to justify themselves and maintain the support of the population by saying that they defend the traditional family and they defend stability, and that their socialist system makes it possible for working families to be secure, makes it possible for society to maintain its values, for families to stay together. They're protecting their population from the instability and the chaos of the Western system. So the socialist and communist governments are conservative. The liberals are the ones trying to overthrow them with wars and regime change operations and protests that they wage in the name of LGBT rights and women's rights. The conservatives are being persecuted by the FBI. The liberals support the FBI. Everything you thought you knew about politics in the last 5-10 years, you have learned is wrong. American politics is not what it used to be. That political setup of the 70s and 80s is long over. American politics has been completely reshuffled. And we, the Center for Political Innovation, represent a layer of people in the United States that would like a government of action that fights for working families. We want a government that will rebuild this country. We want a government that will hire the unemployed to build roads and bridges and highways, that will build new universities and high-speed railway all throughout this country. We want a government that will hire and start having the smartest engineers and scientists make breakthroughs in fusion energy. We want a government that is mobilizing the population to improve living standards and build a strong, prosperous economy in this country. We want a government that'll put oil and gas and all natural resources into the public budget. So as our natural wealth expands, America's coal, America's timber, America's oil, America's gas goes into the public budget and makes the country wealthier and takes the burden of taxation off the population. Our natural wealth should be the property of all people in this country, and the wealth that comes out of our soil should make the entire country wealthier. Number 3, we want the creation of a national bank, a bank that would strategically lend money in a way that would make the country more prosperous. We want a national bank. We want state and local banks that are controlled by the public, that lend money in the interest of the community overall. We want to get rid of the Federal Reserve ripoff scheme. We want to cancel the debt that hangs over this economy as a curse. And we want a national bank and public control of credit so that we can strategically rebuild the country by controlling the purse strings. And 4, we want to enact an economic bill of rights. We want the right to health care, the right to education, the right to see a doctor when you're sick, the right to get a good education, the right to a job, the right to housing. And we don't want these things because we're just bleeding hearts and we see it as a handout. It's the opposite. We want to invest in our population. If you want a strong economy, you need a well-educated population. If you want a strong economy, you need people that are healthy and can go out and work hard to build the country. You want a strong economy, you don't want all kinds of people who are able-bodied to not be out there working and building. You want a population that is well-educated, that is healthy, that is working and employed so they can go out and build and make a stronger country. So we would view an economic bill of rights not as a welfare state program, but rather as a strategic investment in the country. If we want a strong country, we want our people to be healthy. If we want a strong country, we want our people to all be working and contributing to making a strong economy and making a stronger country. If we want a strong country, we want our people to be educated. We want them to see doctors when they're sick. I mean, an economic bill of rights would be an investment in our country because human labor is the source of all wealth. And so the more that we can embolden and empower our people to be creative, to be hardworking, to be visionaries, to be innovators, to go out and create things, the more that we can empower our people to be creative, the stronger our country will be. We want a healthy, working, educated population. And so giving people the right to jobs, healthcare, and education will make a stronger country. And that's the 4-point plan of the Center for Political Innovation. You can find it in our growth booklet, right? We have our 4-point plan, right? Mass program to rebuild the country, public control of natural resources, public control of banking and the canceling of debt, and an economic bill of rights. And let me add that Those 4 points are intended to make a stronger country. And that we are not foreign agents. We are not. I support Russia. I support China, but I support them because I support America. I see the future of America as in alliance with Russia, in alliance with China, in alliance with Venezuela, in alliance with Cuba and Iran. And that I see the greatest enemy of America as being this global financial system where big banks enrich themselves by impoverishing countries around the world and impoverishing communities in our country. And that the way the richest of the rich, the big multinational corporations and international bankers enrich themselves is through making people poorer. And that is the society that we're living in. We have an ultra-rich creditor class, a group of monopolies that sits at the top of our country, sits at the top of the world, that gets rich by making other people poor. And there's many examples of this. You can talk about the military-industrial complex that destroyed Libya, the most prosperous country on the African continent, that destroyed Iraq, kept Afghanistan unstable for 20 years. You can talk about the big drug companies that made themselves wealthier by pushing doctors to overprescribe opioid medications, get people addicted to opioids. You can talk about the prison industrial complex, the prison for profit system. There are many examples of how the richest of the rich in our country acquire their wealth through impoverishing people, through destroying nations, through making other people poor. We're not opposed to wealth. We are absolutely not opposed to wealth. We are absolutely not opposed to growth. We are opposed to those who get rich by making other people poor. And that the time that we live in is a time that is defined by the biggest and most irrational problems that humanity has ever experienced. We live in a time where poverty is created by abundance. And I continue to make this point on every live stream. And those of you who watch closely, it may get repetitive, but we all need to learn to explain this. We need to explain it to our friends, to our coworkers, to our classmates, to our family members. Everyone needs to understand that the reason people are poor right now, the reason that poverty is rising in the United States, that the next generation has a living standard that is much lower than the parents, the reason that young people are stuck in a lifelong cycle of short-term service sector jobs, the reason communities throughout this country are devastated, the reason for that is because there's abundance, and that doesn't make any sense. I've said it, and I'll say it again and again and again until I get blue in the face. In systems of the past, people were homeless because there wasn't enough housing. But in the capitalist system of production, people are homeless because there is too much housing. In the past, people were hungry because there wasn't enough food. But in our modern world, people are hungry because there is too much food. Right? This is the built-in problem of the capitalist system. I'll tell you the coal miner's riddle. Coal miner is at home with his son. The son says to the father, "Father, why is it so cold?" And the father says, "Because we don't have any coal to heat the stove." The little boy says, "Why don't we have any coal?" And the father says, "Because I can't afford to buy any. I lost my job at the coal mine. I've been laid off from my job." And the little boy says to the father, "Why have you been laid off from your job at the coal mine?" And the father says, "Because there's too much coal." That is the problem with the capitalist system. That is something that is built into the capitalist system of economics. The more efficient production becomes, the more wealth that is created, the less people that get hired. And pretty soon the market is full of coal and no one can afford to buy it because all the coal miners have lost their jobs. This is not rational. And in our modern world, we have more wealth and abundance than we've ever had before. We've got more iPhones and iPads. We've got more shoes and clothing. We've got more food being produced than ever before. So there's absolutely no reason that living standards should be going down right now, except that control of the means of production, control of the centers of economic power is in the hands of a wealthy few who operate them in order to maximize their profits. And because of that, as we get better and better and better at producing, the result is more and more poverty, fewer and fewer workers hired at the assembly line. Those workers who are hired being easier to replace and therefore paid less. We are living in a situation where, because of artificial intelligence and because of the great technological leaps, we have more poverty than ever before. And that doesn't make any sense. And it's only going to get worse. The general law of the history of capitalism, from the early 1800s up to today, is that after a huge technological leap, you have a long-term economic crisis when the ability to produce products becomes way more efficient. Technology is always advancing, but when there's a leap in technological progress, the result is a long-term economic crisis. And World War I came after a great technological revolution. World War II came after Henry Ford and his innovations and Taylorism and the great advances on the assembly line. And we are living in the aftermath of a technological leap that is far bigger than what came before World War I and far bigger than what came before World War II. What they are doing now with artificial intelligence and computers in a rational economy, in a rational society, would be amazing. It would be great. However, we live in a society where your ability to live and prosper is based on your ability to rent yourself out to a boss, to sell your labor power. We live in a society where the banks and the factories and the centers of economic power operate to maximize profit for their owners. So as a result, the huge technological leaps that have happened, the computer revolution, is leading to a long-term economic crisis. It's easier than ever to produce products. And as a result, people are poorer than ever before. And self-driving cars is just one example of this. And self-driving cars, the eliminating of the chore called driving, should be a great thing. But in capitalism, it would lead to mass hunger and homelessness and riots in the streets, right? This is the problem of the capitalist mode of production. The more efficient production becomes, the poorer people get. And there's a whole section of the world that does not have this problem. There's a whole section of the world where this problem is not an issue. China, Russia, Venezuela, Vietnam, Iran. There's a whole section of the world where they just continue to advance. They just keep building and they just keep expanding because production is rationally organized in order to serve society, not the profits of a wealthy few. Russia, the economy is centered around state-controlled oil and gas. The government has most of the money coming through state-controlled oil and gas revenues, and they make an economic plan to make the country more wealthy, and they subsidize industries with their oil and gas money, and they continue to build because profits are not in command. China, you have a state-run economy. You have 5-year economic plans. You have state-run industries. You have even private companies that can't just do whatever they want. They get told what they can, what they cannot do by a very strong government. And you can talk about Vietnam and the successes of their socialist-oriented market economy. And all these countries have a very big private sector, and they have lots of millionaires and billionaires who make money, but their economy is rationally organized. It's not the chaos of the market. There is central planning, and that enables them to keep expanding as technological advancement comes. And the computer revolution and all of the problems we're facing in the West as we go hither and yon, they don't have because of the fact that profits are not in command. And there's a whole economy in the world now that is rising because it does not have the problem of poverty created by abundance. China produces more and more wealth, and people in China see their living standard keep rising. Russia produces more and more wealth, and people in Russia continue to see their living standard keep rising. They don't have the problem of poverty created by abundance. Is there poverty in China? There's some, sure. They've been trying to eradicate it. They've eradicated and wiped out poverty more than any other country in history, but they still have it, sure. Is there inequality in China and in Russia? Absolutely. There's millionaires and billionaires. There's poor people. They have problems, but they continue to rise, and their economy continues to grow and expand because this problem that defines the capitalist mode of production, poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance, which is a very important thing to understand in this era of artificial intelligence and computers, and that problem is not there. And that is why it is so important to understand this. This is the 1930s all over again. In the 1930s, there was a Great Depression in the Western capitalist countries, and the Soviet Union was booming. Why was there a Great Depression in the 1930s? Because Henry Ford had invented some very, very efficient ways to organize factory production. And the result was creating more stuff than ever before and all kinds of people losing their jobs. And why was the Soviet Union speeding ahead during the 1930s and becoming an industrial superpower? Because they didn't have capitalism in the Soviet Union. And Stalin was organizing the Soviet economy to build the world's biggest hydroelectric power plants and the world's biggest steel mills because they did not have this problem. And what eventually happened? You got World War II. World War II was a result of this, and that there is a process, and this gets me to the next point, is that there is a process that happens when you have a capitalist crisis. And this has been the thesis of so much of my writing. Is that when you have a long-term crisis of overproduction, when people are losing their jobs, the capitalists begin to fight with each other. The rich and powerful begin fighting each other over what to do about it. They want society to be more stable. They want to make more profit. They want the economy to get better. And they need the government to make that happen. They need the government to take action to make the economy start moving again. However, they want to make sure that whatever action the government takes does not cut into their profits. It cuts into the profits of their rivals. And this is what generally happens. You get a long-term economic crisis. The capitalists begin fighting with each other about how the government can step in and try to fix things. But what the capitalists are fighting about is they want to make sure that when the government steps in to fix things, it fixes them for one group and not the other group. And this is called Bonapartism, when factions in the ruling class try to take control of the government and use the state to stabilize the economy. In the lead up to World War I, Woodrow Wilson was a Bonapartist, and he formed the Ku Klux Klan as a mass movement to have his back. He restarted it in 1915. You had the Ku Klux Klan, birth of a nation. Woodrow Wilson became this authoritarian leader trying to stabilize the economy. World War I broke out, and the country became kind of a military dictatorship. In the lead up to World War II, Roosevelt was a Bonapartist, and he built the labor movement and the labor unions and supported them, and they tried to overthrow him with a military coup called the Business Plot. And he built a mass movement to have his back against the National Association of Manufacturers. And he aligned with the factory owners, or he aligned with the Rockefellers and the bankers against the factory owners. And he backed the labor movement. And he won an alliance with the Soviet Union against the Nazis. And Roosevelt became a very, very authoritarian figure who was trying to stabilize the economy with the New Deal, with the Works Progress Administration, with Social Security, with a lot of the reforms. This is what happens, right? In Germany, you had different capitalists fighting with each other, and Hitler was aligned with Hjalmar Schacht, and he took power and established the Nazi government to try and stabilize the capitalist economy. And he imprisoned a lot of capitalists and et cetera to try and stabilize the German economy. That when a capitalist crisis begins, and it is a long-term crisis, the capitalists begin to fight with each other. And as they fight with each other, they recruit working class people to be their foot soldiers. And they build mass movements of working class people and middle class people and other people to try and back up one faction against another. And this is the whole history of capitalism. And if you read Capital by Karl Marx, he talks about how there was a fight between the factory owners and the landowners, and how the factory owners were fought against by the landowners, and the landowners, the landowning aristocrats, basically, that owned the land, eventually ended up supporting the labor unions and the 12-hour day and the Chartist movement, because they wanted to fight the factory owners. The factory owners wanted to fight the landowners, and that there were divisions in the ruling class that created an opening for the working class movement. And this is the whole history. Roosevelt was under attack by the factory owners, and so he supported the labor movement and the labor unions and the sit-down strikes. There's many other examples of this, where divisions in the ruling class create an opening. During the 1930s, there were a lot of fascist movements. The Silver Legion of America. You had the Silver Shirts, they were called. You had the various, the Black Legion and the Ku Klux Klan, and various fascist movements that were supporting the factory owners against Roosevelt, thought Roosevelt was a communist. You have mass movements that are created by one faction in the ruling class in the hopes of beating the other faction in the ruling class. And this happens. This is the basis for mass movements to exist. And that, you have various mass movements that emerge during an economic crisis that align with one faction of the ruling class against another, all because they want to benefit that faction of the ruling class. And what eventually results from an economic crisis is that the open liberal capitalist society begins to collapse into illiberalism. And that this is what fascism is. Fascism is when the liberal open society of the Western capitalist countries collapses into illiberal authoritarianism amid an economic crisis. And that's what happened in Germany, right? The German society was really, really unstable. You had a really, really long-term big economic crisis, and it got to the point that there were divisions in the ruling class and factions fighting each other, and communist groups and fascist groups and social democrats and people fighting each other in the streets. And ultimately, All of that led to a situation where one faction of the ruling class seized power and collapsed German society into fascism. And they used slave labor and concentration camps and militarism to try and reboot the German economy. And similar things happened in Italy, and this is the tendency of capitalism in a crisis. This is what happened with Woodrow Wilson, right? Where World War I ultimately, he built the Ku Klux Klan, he built this mass movement, and then ultimately World War I broke out, and U.S. society collapsed into an all-out police state during World War I. The Socialist Party was crushed, Eugene Debs was thrown in prison, the Wobblies were wiped out. Right? This is what happens in an economic crisis. That the only way to save the capitalist system when it is facing a long-term economic crisis is with destruction. Why did the Great Depression end? It ended because every major country in the world, every industrialized country in the world except the United States, was destroyed in a big war. Britain was bombed to shit. Germany, France, Belgium were bombed and destroyed. China was destroyed. Japan was destroyed. The whole planet, the whole industrialized world, except the United States, was wiped out in a big, ugly war. And hundreds of millions of people died, and that rebooted the economy. And that if you want to resolve the economic crisis, the problem of poverty created by abundance, poverty amid plenty, if you want to resolve it, but you don't want the capitalist system to end. You don't want to have an economy where profits are not in command. You don't want to have a government of action that fights for working families. You don't want to have an economy that is rationally organized. You want to maintain the power of the capitalists, but you want the economic crisis to end. The only thing you can do is degrow. That is the only thing you can do to save capitalism from this problem of poverty created by abundance, right? If you don't want to have socialism, you don't want to have a centrally planned economy, you don't want to abolish capitalism, the only thing you can do to save society from the ongoing economic crisis is degrow. Let's get this straight. Degrowth is what it's the only option they have. You can either move towards socialism or you can degrow, but there is no other option. All right? If the rich want to stay in power and you have this problem of poverty created by abundance, people are homeless because there's too many houses, people are hungry because there's too much food, the ability to produce wealth has greatly expanded like never before, and the purchasing power of the worker has gone lower than ever before. People can't afford to buy back the products, etc. The only way you can save the system without abolishing it, without having a planned economy, the only way you can save the system is with degrowth. You have to degrow. And the capitalists know this. And that's why the Rockefeller family funded Malthusianism and the Birth Control League and the Neo-Malthusian Society. And that's why Hitler started exterminating people in concentration camps. And that's why talk of overpopulation has been the obsession of the World Economic Forum and has been the obsession of the rich. The only way they can save their system and not move toward a new system is to start destroying on a mass level. World War II saved capitalism from the Great Depression. World War I saved capitalism from the economic crises and panics that led up to it. And that when you have a problem, a crisis of overproduction that is deep and profound and it just keeps going, the way to save the system is with forcible degrowth and destruction. Or you can move towards socialism. And that is a reality of the situation that we're in. And that's why we see the rise of medically assisted suicide. That's why we see obsession with depopulation. That's why these sinister schemes about you'll own nothing and be happy about it and you'll live in a pod and you'll eat bugs. They are trying to dream up some kind of sinister degrowth scheme to save their system because of this built-in problem of poverty created by abundance. But humans don't want to be degrown. They don't, because the natural nature of humanity, the very essence of humanity, is growth. There's nothing more natural than the drive to procreate. Right? If you have a sex drive, it might make you do stupid things. It might affect your judgment. But it's there for a reason. Because your job is one of the most built-in basic things that human beings can do is reproduce. Human beings are constantly reinventing their relationship with nature. And the degrowthers don't understand that. And they say, what about finite resources? What about finite resources? Yeah, if we were still heating our homes with charcoal, we would have deforested the planet a long time ago. But we're constantly reinventing our relationship with nature. Right? And that is the reality of humanity. Human beings are constantly reinventing their relationship with nature in order to live longer, in order to expand their population, in order to have a more comfortable life. Human beings have the ability to constantly reinvent their relationship with their environment and to force the environment to serve them in more efficient ways. And there are minerals in Africa right now that are highly valuable, that if you go back 30, 40 years ago, they were completely worthless. They were just unvaluable rocks. But now they use them in computer chips, and they're really, really valuable. And that is something that the degrowthers just can't understand. That, yes, if we keep using resources the same way, we will eventually have scarcity. But the very nature of mankind is to constantly be reinventing the way we use our resources. And so this is the background knowledge. Again, this took me 47 minutes. I've been on here, and I just gave you the background to what I want to talk about tonight. Buckle your seatbelts, folks, because we barely started. We barely started tonight. I warned you that this was going to be a heavy chat tonight. We're going to go over a lot of different topics, and all that I just told you, many of you already knew that. We have a whole booklet, Do You Believe in Growth, explaining this. And right, this is the foundation for what you need to understand. And now I'm getting to the next level. I started out by saying I avoid saying there are decades where nothing happens. There are weeks where decades happen. That famous quote from Lenin. I avoid that because I've seen flim-flammers and opportunists use that as an excuse to not expand their organizations. And there's a lot of quotes like that from the Russian revolutionary leader Vladimir Lenin. One of my favorite is the story of the peasant, right? Of the peasant on the hill. Right? Vladimir Lenin used to tell his followers a story about, there were two guys walking through the countryside one day. And as they're walking in the countryside, surrounded by fields and crops, and, they look up on the hill. And there's a guy up on the hill waving his arms around crazily. And they see this guy up on the hill waving his arms around, flailing around, and they think this guy must be having must be having an epileptic fit. They think this man maybe he has rabies. Maybe this man is mentally ill. And they see this man just waving his arms around, looking like a nut. They get closer and closer to the hill. And they see that actually what this man is doing is he's sharpening a knife. And that he's waving his arms crazily because to sharpen a knife on a stone, you have to hit it from a different angle. And then what looked completely erratic and completely nonsensical was actually very precise and calculated action on the man's part. It looked crazy. It looked like an epileptic fit. It looked like a crazy person waving his arms around, but it was actually very, very, very precise, calculated action in order to accomplish a goal. Now, Lenin would always tell his followers that story and use it to explain what the Bolsheviks were doing in the lead up to the Russian Revolution. And the only reason that we're here talking about it now is because he was right. The Bolsheviks ended up becoming the party that ruled the Soviet Union. Because what looked very erratic to a lot of other people and what looked like crazy, uncontrolled, hysterical action was actually a very, very calculated strategic maneuver. And it led to a situation developing where they ultimately were able to become the government. Again, I tell that story sometimes, but I don't feel comfortable telling that story because I have seen these kinds of things used by opportunists. But these stories are important because they're correct. Now, they're correct because ultimately the actions that they were taking were not predicated on the battlefield being the same forever. This is what you need to understand. The actions that the Bolsheviks were taking in 1903, 1905, 1910 were predicated on the understanding that a time was going to come where the battlefield would change. Or to use another analogy, a time was going to come where the rules of the game would suddenly completely change. But there would be a moment. Imagine that you're playing a game of checkers, and all of a sudden, all of your checkers pieces change into chess pieces. And you are suddenly playing a completely different game. Well, that happens. And if you operate on the assumption that you're always going to be playing checkers, when that moment comes and suddenly you're playing chess, you're going to be completely bewildered. You're going to be completely lost. You are not going to have any idea what to do. Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist Revolution, he wrote a lot about military strategy. And he developed a military method that works in third world countries a long time ago. Worked in third world countries very effectively a long time ago. And it was called Rural People's War. And in Rural People's War, what generally happens is in the countryside, you build up your forces, you mobilize the peasants to seize their land from the landlords. You go from one area and you build up support and you establish liberated territories. But then, when you get to the point that you control the majority of the countryside, at that point, the game changes. And why does the game change? The game changes because now the objective is to take the cities. And the cities are completely different than the countryside. And the tactics have to suddenly shift. And Mao Zedong called that moment where the tactics suddenly shift. He called that moment strategic equilibrium. And that is a concept that I have been trying to get our community in the Center for Political Innovation to understand. Strategic equilibrium. Now, I'm redefining it for a different meaning, right? Strategic equilibrium, generally, the literal meaning of the phrase is that it's a place, it's a place in a game in which both players have the same chance to win. That's generally what it means, right? If you're at a point in the game where both teams have the same chances of winning, you've reached, in the literal sense, strategic equilibrium. However, when Mao was developing his methods of People's War, he used the term strategic equilibrium to refer to the moment where they went from waging war in the countryside to strategically maneuvering to take the cities. To the moment where the rules of the game completely changed. And I am defining the term strategic equilibrium for what we are doing right now in the United States. We're not waging some kind of people's war in the countryside. And we're not playing checkers and chess. What I'm telling you is that in American politics right now, there's going to be a moment where the rules of the game very dramatically change. There's going to be a moment where the rules of the game very, very dramatically change. And what the Center for Political Innovation is positioning itself to do and preparing for is to be in the right spot when that happens so that we can surge ahead and build the anti-monopoly coalition and move the United States toward socialism, toward 21st century socialism, toward socialism with American characteristics, toward an economy that is rationally organized, an economy that serves the interests of the people, not the profits of a wealthy few, a United States that is aligned with Russia and China and growing, a government of action that fights for working families. We want to strategically position ourselves so that when the rules of the game suddenly dramatically change, we are in a position to surge ahead. And I'm going to explain to you now what the rules of the game currently are. And I'm going to explain to you how they will change. Right now in American politics, there are two factions in the ruling class. The main faction that has the upper hand right now is the Eastern establishment and Silicon Valley tech monopolies. Big oil, big bankers, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, Chase Bank, JP Morgan Chase, HSBC Bank, ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron, General Electric, the ultra monopolies of oil and manufacturing that have long run U.S. politics, the ultra monopolies in America, it's long been known that they have a slightly more liberal perspective than the bulk of the capitalist class, right? The majority of capitalists want to make money, but the ultra rich, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, they're thinking long term, right? The Council on Foreign Relations, which used to be called the New York City Council on Foreign Relations, which before that was called the Round Table Group, was set up by the estate of Cecil Rhodes, the guy who does the Rhodes Scholar Program, right? And Cecil Rhodes, the colonizer of Africa, the big British imperialist, he left money in his will for the creation of foundations and think tanks to envision the ideals of the British Empire. And there is an establishment of old money in the United States that thinks very long term, that is very much obsessed with overpopulation and trying to stabilize the economy by reducing the population. And when you talk about the World Economic Forum and you talk about the Council on Foreign Relations, you talk about the Asia Society, you're talking about a faction that they talk about, the Atlanticist faction. You talk about the Eastern establishment or the Anglo-American establishment. You're talking about a group of people, the people who hired H.G. Wells, the people who hired Bertrand Russell. You're talking about a faction that is thinking long-term about how to preserve the dominance of Western capitalism over the planet. However, in opposition to them, you've had what I call the lower levels of capital, but what has generally been referred to as the I don't know what you want to call it, the military industrial complex, the cowboys, etc. And you have a lot of wealthy people who just want to make money. They just want to make money. And they resent any economic control being imposed on the economy because those rules will be written by the rich people. And during the Cold War, it was the lower levels of capital, the weapons manufacturers, the smaller capitalists, who utilized McCarthyism to fight against the Rockefellers and to fight against the ultra monopolies. And there's a great book that I recommend, The Yankee and Cowboy War, that describes the crisis of the 1960s as a fight between the Eastern establishment and the lower levels of capital. There's a writer, Carroll Quigley, who was a mentor to Bill Clinton, who wrote about this and wrote about, the Anglo-American establishment and their fight against the military-industrial complex, and that there is a push and pull in American politics between the majority of the rich who just want to make money and often see war and direct military confrontation as a great way to make money, who are against any labor unions existing, who want to keep traditional, values, etc., intact, and the upper level, the Eastern establishment, the ultra rich, who see being geostrategic and playing a long game as much more effective in defeating rivals of the United States around the world, and who also, at the same time, tend to be more socially liberal. They want to reduce the population. They want to stabilize society. They don't want there to be any unrest. And they view sex, drugs, and rock and roll and cultural liberalism as a way of controlling people, as a way of keeping people managed, give them pornography on their phones to dazzle them, keep them drugged up with medications or recreational drugs or whatever. And Project MK Ultra of the CIA and, the Kinsey, research, Alfred Kinsey's research that, laid the basis for the sexual revolution, and all of that was funded by the higher levels of capital. And the 60s counterculture was largely the higher levels of capital trying to push back against the military industrial complex, that they saw that the way to defeat communism was playing a long game. And the military industrial complex wanted to escalate the Vietnam War and just bomb the shit out of Vietnam and escalate it because they wanted to make money. And there was a push and pull between the Eastern establishment that is thinking long-term and managerial and about how to maintain control, and the lower levels of capital that just wants to make money and sees big wars as a great way of doing so, and is not excited, certainly doesn't want labor unions because they cut into their profits, and certainly doesn't want to have a situation where black people are out there fighting for their rights or whatever, because that leads to unrest and it scares them. And, that conservatism in America represents the lower levels of capital, or has historically, and that liberalism represents the upper levels of capital. And that the 1960s was very much a fight between these two factions. In the early 1960s, after McCarthy had been defeated, you had the rise of the John Birch Society and Barry Goldwater, and a lot of conservatives. The head of the John Birch Society was a guy named Robert Welch. He owned a candy company, right? He was a candy manufacturer. He's a factory owner. And he thought the Rockefellers, if you read the John Birch Society and their documents, he thought the Rockefellers were a bunch of communists who were supporting unions and were going to crush his ability to make money as a candy manufacturer. And he was very involved in this John Birch Society, this far-right organization, to try and push back. And the Barry Goldwater presidential campaign and the John Birch Society was this right-wing mobilization. And they saw the civil rights movement as a threat, as federal overreach, and the far right of the John Birch Society and the right wing became an expression of this military industrial complex and the lower levels of capital, pushing back against the Eastern establishment and the counterculture, the hippie counterculture. The 1960s political movement, the New Left, was paid for from above. The Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller think tanks and the Institute for Policy Studies and the United Auto Workers Union, which had been, they'd kicked out all the communists and had been taken over by the CIA in the 1950s. Read about Solidarity Center, which was the CIA's labor union house that the UAW facilitated, and the 60s counterculture, the Vietnam War protest movement, the hippies, Project MK Ultra, the drug, all of that was the Eastern establishment mobilizing its forces to try and control McCarthyism and control Barry Goldwater and control the lower levels of capital, right? To stabilize the society and try to defeat communism more effectively. And that the lower levels of capital, in their effort to try and stabilize, the Eastern establishment, in their effort to stabilize U.S. society, they created an episode of unrest, 1968, 1969. Things got a bit out of control. You had Richard Nixon, and by the 80s, U.S. society had reached kind of a truce. Ronald Reagan, he said famously, we're all friends after 6 o'clock. And by the mid-80s, there was no Yankee and Cowboy War anymore. There was no division. These two factions got along with each other. And the universities and certain dissident areas were controlled by the Eastern establishment. And the lower levels of capital pretty much got their way. Neoliberal economic reforms were being enacted. And, Bill Clinton came in as a Democrat who was kind of, going away from the Jimmy Carter Eastern establishment way of doing things. It was more of a neoliberal Democrat, et cetera. And that U.S. society had reached kind of a truce. And as the Soviet Union fell, and in the 90s, there was a booming economy because the Soviet Union had fallen. There was all this destruction. But as U.S. society became very stable in the 80s and the 90s, technology was advancing. The computer revolution was happening. And pretty soon we had the internet. And pretty soon the economy was zooming ahead. And pretty soon the ability to produce products was expanding. And all of these problems have led us to a great technological leap. And the 2008 financial crisis, what was it about? It was about the fact that Americans couldn't afford to keep buying and spending like they used to. And after 9/11, George W. Bush famously told the American people, if you want to help defeat Al-Qaeda, you've got to go shopping. Well, what was he talking about, right? Well, Alan Greenspan was sitting there in the Federal Reserve, and he was saying, we've got to keep them spending. We've got to keep them spending because Americans' wages and living standards had gone down. Americans couldn't afford to keep buying things as they once had. They couldn't afford to keep buying homes. They couldn't afford to keep buying things as they once had. And in 2008, the U.S. economy came to a crash. And why did it come to a crash? It came to a crash because Americans just couldn't keep spending as they once had. Living standards in America have gone down because there's no place for us at the assembly line, because the computer revolution has rendered human labor power much less necessary in the process of production. And the 2008 financial crisis was rooted in the problem of overproduction. The housing bubble burst. Americans could not afford to keep buying homes as they once did. And all the easy credit and lending and mortgage schemes that Alan Greenspan had invented weren't working anymore. And the U.S. economy came to a crashing halt. And so what did we get? We got Barack Hussein Obama, who rode in on a white horse to be the savior of American capitalism. And where did Obama study? He studied at Columbia University, mentored by Zbigniew Brzezinski, a product of the Rockefellers. And what gave Obama and the Democrats the upper hand? Facebook, Twitter, social media. The tech monopolies and the Eastern establishment rode in to take the reins of power and try to stabilize the economy amid an economic crisis. And of course, fighting back against them were the lower levels of capital. The Tea Party, Freedom Works, the Ron Paul movement, etc. And that was the lower levels of capital fighting back to some degree or other against the Eastern establishment that was trying to stabilize everything. Well, here we are. There's a fight in the ruling class now between the lower levels of capital and the Eastern establishment. However, the fundamental division between them, and you hear this when you listen to Donald Trump's speeches, it becomes very apparent. The fundamental point of disagreement between the lower levels of capital and the ultra monopolies is the question of growth. That is the fundamental question. The ultra rich want to degrow to stabilize capitalism. The lower levels of capital just want to make money. There is one faction in our government that wants more children to be born. There is another faction in our government that wants to reduce the population. There's one faction in our government that wants your income to go up. There's another faction in our government that wants to reduce consumption and is dreaming up schemes of how you can own nothing and be happy about it. And the major division within our ruling class at this time is growth versus degrowth. The majority of the capitalists want to grow and make money, and the ultra monopolies want to use heavy-handed state control to drive down consumption and control the economy in order to save their system from a crisis of overproduction. And what we see right now is that the overwhelming majority of socialists and communists and leftists are nothing but foot soldiers of the ultra monopolies. That's why degrowth socialism, which is an oxymoron, is so popular now. And that's why the anti-Trump protests and anti-Trump hysteria and Trump derangement syndrome and all that stupidity was being pushed by the majority of socialists and leftists. Socialists, leftists, and particularly the woke movement are the foot soldiers of the Eastern establishment, of the ultra monopolies, in their effort to contain the lower levels of capital and stabilize the system. Whereas the Trump movement is the lower levels of capital pushing back because they want economic growth. They want deregulation. They want the government to get out, and they want to be able to keep growing. They don't accept the degrowth scheme. They want to make more money selling their products. They want to have more prosperous communities. They don't want to be degrown. And that's the fight in the ruling class. However, the schemes of the ultra-rich to degrow are not just domestic, they're global. I mean, they degrew Libya. Libya used to have the most prosperous living standard on the African continent, and they degrew it. And they degrew Iraq, and they degrew and destabilized Afghanistan. And wherever they go around the world, they're implementing degrowth. Meanwhile, what is China doing all over the world? They're growing. They're growing Africa. They're building high-speed trains. They're industrializing. They're building power plants. All over the world, China is growing and expanding and causing the economies of the world to grow. China's pro-growth. Russia's pro-growth. Iran, Venezuela, Nicaragua, they're all pro-growth. Meanwhile, the ultra-rich in the United States are anti-growth. And who else is pro-growth? The lower levels of capital. So ultimately, the lower-level capitalists and China and Russia and Venezuela and Iran have the same interest. The only way the imperialists, the big monopolists, can stabilize their system is with forcible degrowth. And the only thing that can stop them around the world is Russia and China and the global anti-imperialist movement. And so ultimately, the lower levels of capital have a common interest with Russia and China and Venezuela and Iran and all the anti-imperialist countries. And what I maintain is that right now, the lower levels of capital want deregulation. Right now, the lower levels of capital want cuts, and they want to get the government out because they see the government as a force to try and implement degrowth. But they're going to learn through the course of being oppressed that it's not enough to just get the government out of the way. They're going to need a government that punches up. That's what they're going to need. And that's what China has. And that's what Russia has. And that's what Venezuela has. That's what Iran has. They have a government that punches up against the big monopolies and enables growth. And that will be the basis of building the anti-monopoly coalition that will lead to creating socialism in America. And it won't be Chinese socialism or Russian socialism or Cuban socialism. It'll be socialism with American characteristics. They call socialism in China socialism with Chinese characteristics. And the only type of socialism we're going to have here is going to be a socialism with American characteristics. The lower levels of capital are going to see themselves crushed, and they're going to enter an alliance with the working class. They're going to enter an alliance with the small business owners. They're going to enter an alliance with Russia and China. They're going to form an anti-monopoly coalition, and they are going to have to mobilize against the big monopolies to defend their right to grow. And in order to do that, they're going to need a strong government that will kick the ass of Jeff Bezos and kick the ass of the Rockefellers and Bill Gates and defeat the World Economic Forum and enable growth. They're going to need a government of action that will fight for working families and smash the big monopolies and enable the small business owners and the lower levels of capital to prosper and enable working people in this country to get wealthier and have more children and have more comfortable lives. They are going to need a government of action to combine the power of the pro-growth majority of the American people and the pro-growth majority of the planet to smash the ultra monopolies and their sinister schemes for control and degrowth and depopulation and demoralization. That's what's ultimately going to need to happen. And this understanding that we have is unique. And it's correct. And we laid it out in this booklet, and we distributed 1,000 of these to the libertarians this weekend. We've gotten this message on blast. This is the CPI vision. And we understand that you have to break with the left, because the left have been reduced to being the foot soldiers of the Eastern establishment, of the degrowthers. That's why they're more and more anti-Russia and anti-China every day. That's why they're talking about degrowth. That's why they're obsessed with sex and pornography and drugs, is because they are the degrowth faction. The left, in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union and the communist movement largely, changing, the communist world has largely changed. It's not what it used to be. Leftism has deteriorated into the ultra-rich using some of the more sinister aspects, some of the problems in the communist and leftist mindset, the desire for vengeance, the sex libidinal release, the desire for chaos, using that to build a movement to try and defeat the lower levels of capital. And we don't want any part of that. And we don't. Right? We don't want to help the ultra rich degrow. We want there to be more people. We want the economy and living standard to go up. We don't want to help Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Joe Biden and the ultra rich create some kind of mass movement to force degrowth onto the American people. And so we can't be part of the left anymore, because that is what the left is. The left is a degrowth mass movement. The left no longer believes in socialist economics. The left just wants to help the ultra-rich maintain their control so they can implement degrowth. And we don't want a part of that, so we have to break with the left. That simple. And in doing so, we are in line with the communist countries of the world. The communist countries of the world don't want degrowth. China is obsessed with growth. 5-year economic plans. Vietnam and their socialist-oriented market economy, they're obsessed with growth. Right? We don't want to stop growth. We want growth to expand. But what I'm telling you is, we understand where socialism in the United States will come from. It won't come from the upper levels of capital. It's going to come from the lower levels of capital. And that is our unique understanding. And the Communist Party used to understand this back in the day. You read William Z. Foster, the Communist Party, they talked about the anti-monopoly coalition. I did not invent the anti-monopoly coalition. It's, you could read about it in this book, Twilight of World Capitalism by William Z. Foster, published in 1949. And it ends by talking about an anti-monopoly coalition. I didn't invent this stuff. I did not invent this stuff. Right now, the so-called left are just foot soldiers of the monopolies. But there was always an understanding that socialism in America would come from building an anti-monopoly coalition. That was always the understanding. So what we need to do is we need to position ourselves to have as many friends in the lower levels of capital as we can possibly have, number one. And we need to build a network of people who can work together to carry out operations. And we do that with the understanding that a moment will arise where the fight between the ultra-rich and the lower levels of capital will become so intense that the lower levels of capital will need to create a mass movement. And that's where we come in. And this is already kind of happening. You've seen stuff like QAnon, and the lower levels of capital are experimenting right now. They hate communists. They hate communists. Let's not be confused about it. They are the lower levels of capital. They think Biden's a communist. They think that Kamala Harris is a communist. They think the Rockefellers are communists. They think total free market capitalism is what they want. And they're going to have to learn through the course of struggle that they need a government that punches up. And they're going to resist that because that goes against everything they've been taught. And to some degree or other, it goes against their class position. They are private capitalist owners. They see communism as a threat to their ownership of private property. Now, we can show them that in China and in Vietnam and in Nicaragua and most of the communist world now, capitalists, lower level capitalists, do very, very well and are treated very, very well by the government. But in their mind, communism represents the government coming and seizing their property. They see the big monopolies as communist because they're using the government to push people, push people like them out of business. That's how they see things. But the more they get attacked, and the more threatened they are, the more they are going to need a mass movement to back them up. And we have to position ourselves to be that mass movement. Right now, they don't really want to form a mass movement. Right now, they're very, very reluctant to do so, and they're very afraid to do so. Right? And you see all these false starts. You saw what happened with January 6th and QAnon, and they're very nervous. That's what I'm telling you. Right now, it's going to be very difficult. And it is extremely difficult. We have a toxic social media culture where it's very hard to get people to get along with each other. It's extremely hard to get people to work together. Every narcissistic difference, every argument, every personality trait, and on top of that, a lot of people see being politically active as being a consumer of social media. Being political means that you have a certain streamer that you watch and you like them. That's what they think it means to be political. That you watch a certain YouTube channel and you read certain books and, it is just being a consumer, unfortunately. That's what most people think it means to be politically active. It means you consume the social media of certain people, certain brands, right? You are involved in some kind of social media internet fandom of a certain person. And that's the circumstances that we're in right now. And we will not win in these circumstances. We do not have the algorithms rigged for us, right? We do not have the huge amount of money that is necessary. We're not going to win the social media wars, and we're not concerned about that because the revolution will not be on social media. And there's going to come a time where suddenly in real life organizations are going to be very, very, very important. And your ability to pull off real operations and have people who have worked together in the streets and have cooperated with each other, and our ability to have people with whom we strongly disagree but see a common interest, the ability of networks of people and communities that can get things done to operate and be useful, that is going to be the decisive factor. If you go to any country in the world where they have a strong communist movement, they'll tell you where the communist neighborhood is. You'll go to that neighborhood. You'll see a neighborhood where everybody knows who the local communist organizers are. They know everybody in the neighborhood. And there's food being distributed and given out by the local communist organizations. And there are political meetings where the whole neighborhood comes and listens. You look at what the Black Panthers did in the 1960s with the free breakfast program. You look at what the Communist Party did with the unemployment councils. They had a base of support. They had a real organization, a real network of people that could feed those hungry children, that could organize those unemployment councils, that could get shit done in real life, that could bring people into a community of activism to mobilize them as useful allies of one faction in the ruling class to carry out real operations. That's what genuine revolutionary movements are. And right now, the lower levels of capital are doing everything they can to not form a real movement. And right now, the internet is full of rodeo clowns who maybe even sound like me or sound kind of like us, say good things about Russia and China, but maybe want to support the woke faction, or maybe they're anti-woke, but all of the rodeo clowns, are there to keep you from doing what is necessary. And those rodeo clowns are going to have the upper hand because the crisis has not gotten so intense right now that people need us. I've told people many times before that revolutionaries are like dentists. And this is the truth. Revolutionaries are a lot like dentists. Some people like dentistry, but very few. Most of us would prefer to never go to a dentist in our lives, right? But there are some people that, when they're kids, they play with the doll's teeth. They read books about dentistry. They go to college and they go to dentistry school and they love teeth and they become dentists. But those people are very few and far between. Most of us would love to stay away from dentists, stay 100 miles away from a dentist, but then you get that cavity and it hurts so bad. You just can't, and you've got to find yourself a dentist. That's what a revolutionary is. Most people don't want to be involved in some kind of revolutionary movement. Most people don't want to study Marxism and economics. Most people don't want to be involved in some kind of revolutionary movement. Most people just want to live their lives. Maybe some of them have a romantic attraction, or maybe some of them think, well, it might be exciting to be, but they don't really want to do it. But you that are watching this stream right now, me, those of us in the Center for Political Innovation, we're the freaks. We're the dentists. We're the people that are so into this obscure thing that most people are not into, that we get into it voluntarily. And there will come a time where the pain that the masses are feeling is so extreme that they have no choice but to join a revolutionary movement, to join a movement of people in the streets mobilizing for jobs, healthcare, and education, aligned with the lower levels of capital to push back amid a very big division in the ruling class. And that is when we will prosper. And everything we do as an organization is done on the assumption that that day will come, and in preparation for that. And the way we function, as I've talked about, top and bottom organizing. On the one hand, we are trying to make as many goddamn friends as we possibly can. And it's not easy because social media is toxic. There are people who really sound a lot like me, but go out of their way to try and isolate us because they're the people funding and supporting them have told them, stay away from Caleb. Mass movements are dangerous. We can't have a mass movement. I'm not making that up. That is true. And there are people that sound very similar to us, but are very hostile, and that it's very, very hard. We need to make friends anywhere we can find them. Angela McCurdle of the Libertarian Party does not agree with me about economics, doesn't agree with me about anything, but she's liking my tweets right now, and she invited me and gave me nothing but kind treatment at the Libertarian Party convention, and we're friends, and that is an important place to be. And I have other friends in other areas who don't agree with a lot of what I say and don't agree with maybe my perspective, but they're trying to build a community, an illiberal community, a community based on traditional values. They're trying to hold it together amid our toxic liberal culture, and they see that I'm doing the same thing and that we both are pro-growth and pro-abundance and opposed to the woke cancer, and they want to work with us. And we need to build as many friends, make as many friends as we possibly can. That's the first thing. That's top operations. Second thing is we need to solidify our group. We need to have a community of people who know each other, can rely on each other. We need to figure out what we're good at. We need to perfect our ability to publish books and put on conferences and have workshops. And we need to get our group, our solid core of people, as solid as ever. And that's why I'm thankful for all the wrecking we've endured, because a split is necessary when you're building a core. Obviously, when you're doing top operations, you want to get along with as many people as possible. When you're building a core of people, a split is necessary. There were plenty of people that were with CPI until things got tough, until we got attacked, until we faced social media mockery, until they got jealous, until it looked like we were going to demand more of them than just being a social media brand. And they threw a little baby tantrum and they left, or they spread lies about me on the internet or whatever. Thank goodness they did that, because now they're gone. They're gone. And because they're gone, we can now organize with people that are much more effective. Our president, Elizabeth Young, she was a member of CPI. She's a brilliant person. She is one of the most dedicated CPI members. She is the most dedicated member that I've ever seen. There's never been somebody who's more dedicated to our principles and our ideology. I had no idea. She got overlooked because there were all these jackasses who didn't really believe in what we were about, who were ready to jump ship the second things got hard. You know, they were there and they were taking up the spotlight, but then they all left. And Elizabeth was calling people on the phone every night and doing everything she could to keep the organization together. And I realized who was the gold. And we happily elected her president of the organization, because she should have been president from day one. But we didn't know that. We didn't know that because we had not yet been tested. Right? We need to keep our core of people together. We need people that know about the city building tendency, know about our understanding, can go through our textbook, know about William Z. Foster and Sam Marcy and the new communist movement and the divisions in the ruling class and what we draw from LaRoucheism and Christianity and our understanding of the Bible and Jesus. And we need people that are solid to form our core. And that's our bottom operations. And then we need to make as many friends and allies as we can, libertarians, conservatives, anybody who will work with us, anyone we can be useful to, anyone who we agree on something, whether it's growth, whether it's peace on the Korean Peninsula, whatever it is. We need to make as many friends as we possibly can. We need to learn from our friends. Learn from what they do right, how they get things right. Learn from what they've learned. Learn some of the flaws in our own ideology. Come to terms with the dark side of communism. The God killer, the evil, the libidinal rebellion. We need to purge our movement of the dark, evil Trotskyite element, right? We need to purify our movement to make it a city builder movement, to make it an optimistic pro-growth movement. We need to get rid of the dark things that gave birth to the Cultural Revolution in China, then gave birth to the gulags and the gas chamber. Well, there was no gas chambers, but the guillotine, et cetera, right? We need to get rid of the things in our movement. The things in our movement that have been hijacked for evil. We need to make our movement as constructive and optimistic and as American as it possibly could be. That's what we need to do. Right? We need to make our movement as positive and as optimistic, as love-oriented, as pro-community as possible. We need to make our movement solidly city building. Solidify our own organization so that it's solid as a rock. So there's no internal conflict or disagreement we can't overcome. So we trust each other. So we're like a family of people who's on a mission, comrades. And at the same time, we need to be making friends anywhere we can possibly make them, because it's hard to make friends now in this toxic culture. And that is how we need to operate, because when strategic equilibrium comes, when people are more desperate than they've ever been, when the pain intensifies, we need to be able to set up. We need to be able to swing into action. And when the crisis comes, I want us to be able to have soup kitchens on every neighborhood and every community and every block. And I want us to be organizing community patrols and community watches that can keep people safe. And I want us to be seen as the group that holds together a patriotic, pro-American, pro-growth element that is holding society together amid the crisis. And that anybody, lower level capitalists, small business owners, anybody who doesn't want to see the country fall apart wants to work with us, because we'll hold society together and we'll get through the crisis. That's what we need to become. We need to hold together our base. We need to make alliances wherever they can possibly be made, whether it's on the basis of cleaning the street, whether it's on the basis of bowling, right? Whatever it's on the basis of, we need to make a network of allies, and we need to hold together our group. We need our group to be solid as a rock, and we need our network of allies to be massive, so that when strategic equilibrium comes and when the pain gets so intense that they have to see a dentist, when the rules of the game suddenly change and mass movements are urgently needed, and no one gives a fuck about some social media brand, right? No one could care less. When you're hungry, when there's chaos in your neighborhood, do you care about some social media, some streamer bro? No, you want to get shit done. When the rules of the game suddenly change, we need to be able to lead. And I'm going to tell you a couple things. Now, I'm going to end my opening remarks tonight, which are almost 2 hours. That's okay. I'm going to end my opening remarks by telling you two things. First thing, I want you to take a look at the history of the Russian Revolution. And I want to point something out to you. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it was apparently very common in the United States for people to at one point refer to Vladimir Lenin as Nikolai Lenin. Did you know this? They called him Nikolai Lenin. Well, his name was not Nikolai. Why was it that this mistake was so frequently made? Ronald Reagan, in one of his speeches, he called him Nikolai Lenin. What is that about? It's about the fact that at the time the Russian Revolution happened, no one had ever heard of Lenin in the United States. And in fact, I've found old newspapers when the Russian Revolution happened, they blamed the revolution on Trotsky. And they said, Trotsky, and nobody had ever heard of Lenin in the United States. No one had ever heard of Lenin in Europe. No one had ever heard of Lenin in Russia. People knew about him. But the reason they called him Nikolai Lenin in the United States is because they had him confused with another guy. There was a Russian communist organizer in New York City named Nikolai Bukharin. And he was well known among Russian Americans, and he went back to Russia when the Bolshevik Revolution broke out. And he was, he lived in New York City, and so they assumed Nikolai Bukharin and Lenin were the same person, and they weren't, right? And no one had ever heard of Lenin. No one had ever heard of Lenin. They'd heard of Trotsky. Everybody knew Trotsky. Trotsky was this well-known Russian guy. He had his own newspaper in New York City, Novy Mir, New World. Everyone knew Trotsky. And people even knew Nikolai Bukharin. People knew him. He was this Russian guy who lived in the United States, who was tied in with some group, the Bolsheviks, that no one had ever heard of. No one had ever heard of Lenin. No one had ever heard of the Bolsheviks until suddenly they were marching into power. Why? Because things hadn't changed to the point that they were relevant. People that were really into communism knew about the Bolsheviks. And they said the Bolsheviks were a cult. They said they were a cult. It wasn't a revolutionary organization. It was like a monastic order, a group of people who give the whole of their lives. They were seen as a group of whack jobs. It was a cult of people who give the whole of their lives, democratic centralism. They support nationalism. Everyone knows communists are against nationalism. That's crazy. They say that the problem isn't even capitalism. It's imperialism, that it's monopolistic capitalism. Everyone in the global communist movement said, oh, we want nothing to do with Bolshevism. That's some weird group, this guy Lenin, who wants everyone to give the whole of their lives. And he's got this whole theory that says somehow nationalism is okay, and that we're actually just fighting imperialism. We're not just fighting against capitalism. And now the whole thing looks wacky and weird. And it was just this weird little sect, this weird little cult that nobody had heard of. And everybody knew Trotsky. And everybody knew, about the Social Democrats. And everybody knew Emma Goldman, the anarchist. And everybody knew, but Lenin, nobody knew about. In fact, they got his name wrong. They called him Nikolai Lenin because they got him confused with somebody else. They had no idea who they were, because the work they were doing was not glamorous. And the work they were doing was not, romantic. They were not on the front pages of every newspaper. They were not being heralded as, these people might be running Russia someday. They weren't. It wasn't until the crisis got so intense that they distinguished themselves that they suddenly became known. They were known because they led a group of people that were able to become the force against World War I, the force demanding Soviet power, the force to repel the Kornilov reaction, and they ultimately were able to come to power. And that's important to keep in mind. Nobody had ever heard of them. No one knew who they were. They weren't the big... And in fact, when World War I broke out, all the big parties fell on their faces, right? The German Social Democrats that had millions of members, that had trade unions in every factory and, marching bands and choirs, they fell on their face. The British Labour Party, that had seats in the parliament, was supposed to be this big socialist group. They fell on their face. All the big socialists, all the people who get really good at socialism in capitalist society, all the people that make a name for themselves as the revolutionary leader in a non-revolutionary situation, all the front men, all the flashy people, they all fell on their faces. And this weird group that no one had ever heard of, that had all kinds of new theories, the party of new type, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, progressive nationalism among the colonized people, all these new theories that they developed. It was this wacky group no one had ever heard of. They surged forward to lead the Russian Revolution. And you know why? Because they engaged in political innovation. They broke the rules. They were in it to win it. They were in it to win it. And this is a really important thing to understand. If we were trying to win at socialism in America, we would sound completely different. We were trying to be popular with the small minority of people in America that consider themselves socialists. If we were trying to become the leaders of the Bernie Sanders movement or something, we would sound completely different. But we're in it to win it. We're in it to win it. And we know where this is going to come from. We know it's the lower levels of capital that are progressive. We know it's the imperialists and the big monopolies that are the enemy. We know that the anti-monopoly coalition ultimately needs to be built. We understand this scientifically, so that has us operating in a different way. And number two, we're not trying to build a social media brand, because a social media brand doesn't make a fucking revolution. A social media brand doesn't really matter. If you're starving in your neighborhood and you don't have food, a social media influencer will not feed you. If you are starving in your neighborhood, if there's chaos in your neighborhood, a social media organization, a social media streamer isn't going to keep you safe at night, right? We're trying to build an in real life organization, which is way more dangerous, which is way more risky, and which isn't as sexy, and which gets you suppressed, which the state considers you to be way more of a threat. And that's just how these things work. That's just reality. The way we operate right now isn't as successful now because we anticipate strategic equilibrium. And we're in it to win it. So that's the first point. And the second point I want to make, I would encourage you all, and actually there's another point I want to make. I would encourage you all to go and read the book of Jeremiah from the Bible. I've given lectures on this YouTube channel before about the book of Jeremiah, about why the book of Jeremiah is particularly relevant. Because in light of the fact that communism, quote, has become synonymous with wokeism, in light of the fact that the leftist aesthetic, the red flag, all of that has been hijacked by the ultra-rich, we need to learn to sound more like the prophet Jeremiah. The prophet Jeremiah went through Israel saying, we are going to lose our country. We don't change. We don't stop mistreating the widows and orphans. We don't stop using people as slave labor. We don't stop sacrificing our children in these disgusting satanic rituals. If we don't get back to the foundations upon which our society is built, we're going to collapse as a society. And the prophet Jeremiah went through ancient Israel preaching repentance and preaching a warning that if Israel did not repent from its ways, and if they did not change dramatically, they were going to lose their country. And he was ultimately proven to be correct because they got invaded by Babylon. And if they had a society where people were treated fairly, and if they had cared for the widows and orphans, and if they weren't sacrificing, and murdering children in pagan rituals, if they had not been doing that, the people would have had the solidarity to come together to repel the Babylonian invaders. But they did not have that. They had strayed from their principles. They had become a society of greed and selfishness and indifference to other people's suffering. They had become a group of people who did not care for each other. They'd become a society where homeless children were on the streets and elderly widows were hungry next to them. They became a society where parents murdered their children because they thought some golden calf god would give them good luck. They became a society where people used loopholes in the law to get people to be their slave laborers, to build mansions for them. They became a society where the rich had all the power and the poor were cast aside and had no voice. And the prophet Jeremiah made an alliance with some factions in the ruling class, with one of the kings, to go around preaching repentance, to say, no, we've got to stop doing this, or else we're going to fall apart as a society. And that is what the prophet Jeremiah preached. And one king protected him, and then a new king came in and threw him in jail and had him publicly whipped. And the prophet Jeremiah was humiliated and publicly flogged and had feces thrown at him and was thrown in prison and was tortured. But the whole time, the prophet Jeremiah led this movement of people saying that if we don't change the way our society is set up, we will lose our country. And a big part of what the prophet Jeremiah preached was economic justice, was food for the hungry, was caring for the poor, was people loving each other and not being motivated by naked self-interest. The prophet Jeremiah was a city builder socialist. In ancient times, in ancient Israel, in his own way, the prophet Jeremiah built a mass movement of poor people. He aligned with the king, one faction of the ruling class. And he was saying that if we do not create a society that treats people fairly, and if we don't learn to care for the poor, we will be destroyed. You go and read the book of Jeremiah. And because leftism and socialism has become so confused, we need to start sounding like the prophet Jeremiah. That is what we are for America. We are the prophet Jeremiah. If America does not reorganize its economy, if we can't find a way to get along with Russia and China, if we don't start building roads and schools and hospitals, if we don't start educating people, if we don't start caring for people, if we don't build a society where the needs of the people come first and the profits of a few are not in command, we will lose our country. And we don't want to lose our country. Unlike the woke people, we don't think it's a good thing. Right? Obviously, this country has a history of racism. Obviously, this country is currently at the center of a global imperialist system. But we don't want to make things worse in this country. We want life to get better. And the way America is going, we are headed for societal collapse. That's what we're headed for. We're not headed for communism. We're not headed for socialism. We are headed for societal collapse right now. America is coming apart. Our elite are fighting with each other. Our states are fighting with each other. Our communities are more divided. We are coming apart as a country. And we need to be the voice crying out in the wilderness, shouting loudly at the top of our lungs that we must build a mass movement to save this country, to save this country from the course that it's on. We are the 21st century versions of the prophet Jeremiah. That's one thing I like about Cornel West. He talks about being prophetic. He talks about prophetic Christianity, prophetic activism. Well, in the sense that Jeremiah was screaming and enduring persecution and building a mass movement and rallying people to try and save ancient Israel so that it wouldn't be destroyed, so that it could have the solidarity necessary to repel the invaders, to hold society together, that's what we are doing. I've compared us to Julius Caesar in ancient Rome, and now I compare us to the prophet Jeremiah in ancient Israel. And if we want the American people to hear us, we don't want to sound like a woke mob. We don't want to be violent revolutionaries waving red flags in their face. We need to sound like the prophet Jeremiah. We need to save America. Only socialism can save America. Only socialism could save America. And on a final note, I'll end my opening remarks. We're about to hit the 2-hour mark. I'll end my opening remarks by, I want people to check out something. This is something I just became aware of a few months ago. I wasn't even aware of this. But this was an event that happened in the year 2000. Someone I really, really admire, Minister Louis Farrakhan, organized a rally in Washington, D.C. on October 16th of the year 2000. It was called the Million Family March. I want you to go take a look at it. And as Minister Louis Farrakhan, I have always admired him. He was a big supporter of Gaddafi, very well respected in Iran, very well respected in Venezuela, and is an important revolutionary black leader. And in the year 2000, he organized the Million Family March. And when you hear Million Family March, you immediately think, oh, this is a march against abortion and gay marriage, right? Traditional family values. Well, it was that, technically. But if you look at what the Million Family March was about, it was about a lot more than that. The Million Family March called for more funding for healthcare, more funding for education. It called for more funding for drug treatment facilities, and it called for completely overhauling and rejecting the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The Million Family March was this big rally in Washington, D.C., led by Minister Louis Farrakhan, who is an anti-imperialist to his core, pro-Gaddafi, pro-Cuba, pro-Venezuela, pro-Iran. The Iranians love him. I mean, that's where I met his staff, was at a conference in Iran. And the LaRouche movement was part of the Million Family March. Lyndon LaRouche and his followers attended and supported the Million Family March. And so did the Unification Church, followers of Reverend Sun Myung Moon. And it was a rally in Washington, D.C., October 16th, in the year 2000, the Million Family March. And it was a rally for economic justice, an end to the death penalty, a complete overhaul of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And civil rights leaders were involved, people who'd worked with Dr. Martin Luther King. And it was an anti-imperialist rally themed around supporting families. This is very interesting. The Million Family March. Take a look at that. Take a look at that. Very, very interesting. Now, I wasn't there. I was a child. I had no idea what was going on. And honestly, I didn't even know this march had happened until recently. And I know that there was a lot of chaos and groups disagreed with each other afterwards and stuff like that. But this is very interesting. The Million Family March. Take a look at that, because I know the Nation of Islam, they have roots in communities. And they can, when they call a big rally in Washington, D.C., they get hundreds of thousands of people there. And they know what brought Gaddafi to power in Cuba or in Libya. They know what a real revolutionary movement is like. And it seems like in the year 2000, in the lead up to the U.S. presidential election in the year 2000, they organized an anti-imperialist rally. But it wasn't part of the left. Right? It wasn't, the communist groups would have hated this march. I guess it included opposing abortion in its platform, and it included opposing gay marriage. But it had an agenda of economic justice. Healthcare for all, education, welfare for all, Social Security reform, overthrowing the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. That's very interesting. It's very interesting. And I don't know how things are going to develop. I don't know how things are going to develop, but I do know one thing, is that I'm committed to building the Center for Political Innovation. I am an anti-imperialist to my core. I know that the future of America is beyond imperialism. The future of America is peace with Russia and China. The future of America is a centrally planned economy. And I also know that I am not a foreign agent. And I also know that, the idea that I'm not a patriot, I don't love my country, that's malarkey, right? And there is a difference between me and some of the people on the internet that you see that defend Russia and China. And the difference between me and them is I defend Russia and I defend China because I know that the system that they are fighting against is the same system that is destroying America. And I want a new America that is arm in arm with Russia and China. But there are some people who defend Russia and China just because they hate the United States. They think it's edgy. They think America is an evil, racist society, blah, 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 blah. I am not one of those people. And I kept my mouth shut about Aaron Bushnell. I would never promote Aaron Bushnell. It's very sad what happened. And obviously, the fact that he supported the Palestinians is very admirable, but I will never encourage or celebrate an American committing suicide. Never. And I don't want the United States to become less stable. I want the United States to become more stable. And I don't support anything that will just make the United States weaker. And I don't want America to fall. Do you hear this? I do not want America to fall. I want America to get stronger. But I know that the only way America will get stronger is by breaking out of imperialism. And I know that the only way we're going to get a better country is for the United States to break the power of the big monopolies and have a government of action that fights for working families. That is the only way America will get stronger as a country. We will not get stronger with imperialism. We will not get stronger with free markets. We will not get stronger. And the death of imperialism and the death of the satanic international system that rules the world will be the rebirth and resurrection of America. I am pro-America. I am pro-America. And that's why I defend Russia. And that's why I defend China. And that's why I defend Iran. And that's why I oppose Israel. And that's why I oppose the Ukrainian proxy war. And that's why I oppose dumping weapons onto Taiwan. And that is why I oppose these ugly wars, because I am pro-America. And yes, there are some people. I mean, no need to pretend otherwise. There are some people who say things that I say about international politics simply because they want to be edgy, simply because they do hate the United States. They do want to see this country crash and burn. I am not one of those people. And I just want to be clear about that. And if you are one of those people, forget ever having influence in American politics. Everything we do is motivated by love of our country, love of our community, wanting a better country. A new America means breaking out of imperialism. A new America means breaking the power of the international bankers and ultra monopolies that hate our country. And that's what I need to say. So on that note, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. We got Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Welcome, Mark. Very, very good. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Philip, hi. Brooklyn in the house. Good to see you, Phil. Shanty in Mexico. Alex Rickle in Oregon. Steve in Boston. Patch in Arizona. Patrick in Maine. Junior in Florida. Welcome, Junior. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Seasoned noob in China. Auckland, New Zealand. Luca in Singapore, Alex in Brazil, John Whitty in Houston, Neil Fraser in Hong Kong, Eric in Holland, Balthazar in Oakland, Mosen in Denver, St. David's, Bermuda, JDL in Missouri, Harold Dogbottom in Kakalaki, Colin in Greensboro, Mads from Massachusetts. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Nate in Chicago. Nate in Chicago. Salt Lake City, Utah, south of 8 Mile, Detroit. Daniel in San Gabriel Valley, LA area. And I did get your email, Dan, and I will email you as soon as I have the poster with all the details about the event. Guy in Occupied America. Dan Keating in New Jersey. April and Chris out in Salt Lake City. Sherry in New Jersey. Northern Michigan, A Better America. Jonathan in North Carolina. Ed in Louisville. Welcome, Ed. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Tim in the West Coast. Seattle. Very, very good. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. We got Emperor Penguin. Welcome, Emperor Penguin. Very, very good. John McCarthy from Chicago is with us. I will answer your super chat. Names and locations. John McCarthy from Chicago. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations. Names and locations. Clay of Colorado Springs. Anybody else? Names and locations. Quick reminder to anyone who is in the LA area. Harry in Richmond, Washington. Welcome, Harry. Richland, Washington. Anyone who's in the Los Angeles area, send me an email, and I'll make sure you get an announcement. Announcement about the event is coming soon. It'll be very well anticipated. So there we go. There we go. Very, very good. Anyhow, we got Moonlit Beach, California, Harry. All right. So I'm going to start answering people's super chat questions. I do want to mention super chats are not only good because they, they give me something to talk about in the second half of our show. Super chats are also good because of the fact that they help me pay my rent. I live in New York City. My rent is too damn high. You don't want to know what the rent is that I pay on this 2-bedroom apartment. But it does give me this extra room that I can use to do my job from home studio. I can do these streams so frequently. So I ask that you send super chats as a way to support this channel. But there are other ways you can support me too. Another is that coming up on the 1st of June, I will have a patrons only stream. So if you're a member of the Patron, you'll get to be on that stream. So coming up on June 1st. So sign up on the Patreon. That's one way to support me. Another thing you can do, right? If you want to offset the cost of this pamphlet that we distributed at the Libertarian Convention, you can Cash App me. Cash App, Caleb Maupin 22. That's always appreciated. That helps me, and also keep in mind anything that goes to CPI, I don't have access to those funds. I don't have access to that bank account. I have nothing to do with CPI money. CPI money supports CPI stuff. It does not support me personally. So I don't get any paycheck or anything from CPI. So if you're a member of CPI, if you donate to CPI, that's CPI's business. It's not related to me. So just in case, some people tried to insinuate some stuff a long time ago and they were wrong. So yeah, so there you go. So on that note, I'm going to start answering people's super chat questions. I'm just going to start answering people's super chats. Please send super chats. Give me something to talk about. It's late, but the night is young. I could go on for another couple hours. My voice seems strong, so keep me talking. See how long you can get me answering questions. Alrighty. Unfortunately, StreamYard is doing that thing where I have to scroll up, which is obnoxious, but that's okay. And so I'm going to start answering people's questions. The first the first is a Rumble rant. First one is a Rumble rant. And it is the dissolution of Yugoslavia an example of degrowth? Yes, it is. And I would add that part of the degrowth of Yugoslavia was breaking it apart, playing the different nationalities against each other, because it's way easier to implement austerity on a local level than it is on a national level. And this is something that the degrowth wing of the ultra-rich have tried in the United States. Local control is something that the ultra-rich often use when demanding austerity. Local control, decentralization, is often a mechanism for implementing degrowth and austerity. And the Ford Foundation and others have gone on record, saying that yes, they want to decentralize government and break apart a central authority in order to more effectively carry out degrowth. And that's why, that is why we are very much trying to oppose that. And I'm not in favor of any separatist movement in the United States. I don't want California to secede, right? I would support the right of a colonized people to break away if they wanted that, but we're not trying to balkanize or break apart the United States because that's what the ultra rich want, right? It's way easier to implement austerity when you break a country up into little pieces. And we see that with Yugoslavia. And Michael Parenti in his book To Kill a Nation gives a great example of that. And yes, they broke apart Yugoslavia piece by piece. And in all the places they broke it apart, they implemented neoliberal economic reforms that smashed apart the economy. So I would say, yes, the destruction of Yugoslavia is a great example of degrowth. That was the first one. All right. Now, next, I'm going to start answering people's super chat questions. And I see a couple of them that have come through. There are some things that I cannot answer on this stream, and I've made clear why, but there we go. Is adventurism ever good? What about SDS destroyed the draft records in Maryland during the Vietnam War? Well, what is adventurism, right? I think we need to understand what adventurism is, right? Often left adventurism, punchism, Blanquism, this is something we oppose, which is people trying to escalate to an armed struggle for their own gratification. Trying to engage in violent or exciting tactics because it will make them feel revolutionary. It'll make them feel like they're having an adventure. Right? Now, what you're describing here was an act of civil disobedience. That was a group of people. I believe one of them was a Catholic priest who was opposed to the Vietnam War. And so in order to, make a statement opposing the Vietnam War, they went and destroyed draft records as their act of disobedience. They did not harm any people, but they wanted to impede the military draft. And so they chose to engage, and they knew that they would be arrested for it, and they expected that they would be, prosecuted. And I think they did go to prison for it. And it was done with the intention of harming the war effort and symbolically getting them arrested. And that's a little bit different. Now, I generally don't think illegal activities are what people should do, right? I oppose any illegal activity. CPI is a legal organization. We only engage in legal speech and education, as well as community service projects and such. But I would put this kind of illegal activity in a separate category. People setting off bombs or killing people or engaging in violence is very different than people impeding the war effort symbolically by destroying property. And that's very different. Both of them are illegal, and I do not advocate people do any of those things. But I don't see that action as adventurism per se. I see that as a symbolic act. And it was in a number of different places. I think there was a Catholic priest. Was it Father Roy Bourgeois, I believe was his name? Was that his name? Father Roy Bourgeois, right? I believe that was who it was. Father Roy Bourgeois, right? He was a Roman Catholic priest. No, it was another Catholic priest. I'm sorry. Father Roy Bourgeois is, he was involved in South American peace activism. But Father Roy Bourgeois and other pacifists who engage in kind of symbolic acts of property destruction or something in order to make a statement to get themselves arrested. I don't think that's necessarily it's not what people should be doing at this time, I don't think, but I don't consider it to be adventurism. It's an act of symbolic protest. And their intent was to get arrested. Their intent was to get themselves in prison. So it's a different kind of category, right? And that part of that is related to the fact that the communists made a strategic decision to oppose the Vietnam War, not on a class basis, because the U.S. economy was so strong during those years, right? And that opposing it on a class basis wouldn't have been effective. They opposed it on a pacifist basis, on a middle class basis, and so part of that was promoting pacifism. So there you go. All right. Let me get to the next super chat here. I got to scroll up to get to the next super chat. That's okay. We can do that. We can survive. We can do that. I just have to remember to go back to the bottom of the screen after it's over. All right. Next super chat for a questionnaire portion. What is your opinion of the top contenders for Iran's presidency? I might vote for Iraqi-born General Ali Larijani. Needs someone to solve domestic issues. Well, I honestly don't know that much about the current situation in Iranian politics. I have met Ali Larijani. I met him when he was the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, when he came to the United Nations to speak about the Iran nuclear deal. I met him. I actually interviewed him for Press TV. If I could show pictures on the screen, if StreamYard were cooperating, I would dig up the picture of me and Ali Larijani, and I would put it on there. But I've heard that he plays a somewhat neutral role, right? That sometimes he goes with the moderates and sometimes he goes with the hardliners. Now he's talking more of a hardliner tone, but he's played different roles. I also heard Nate is pointing out that Ahmadinejad is running, but he's not the same as he used to be, right? He's been marginalized and he's had a fight with the supreme leader. So now he actually is pivoting in not such a good direction. So it's complicated, right? And I think it's up to the Iranian people to pick whoever they think will be best. And I'm sure whoever they pick will be a hardliner. There's no way they're going to make the Rouhani mistake again, right? The reformist movement is dead at the moment. It'll probably get revived, and some kind of reform is necessary. The supreme leader of Iran always emphasizes that, in Iran they have two factions: the principalists, that are derogatorily referred to as the moderates, and the principalists, that are derogatorily referred to as the hardliners, and the reformists, that are derogatorily referred to as the moderates. And the supreme leader of Iran has pointed out that every Muslim should be both a principalist and a reformer, right? That they should stick to their Islamic principles, but they should reform and modernize and fit them in with the modern time. And that both the principalist faction, that are called hardliners, and the reformist faction, that are called moderates, are both ultimately in line with the Islamic Republic and its ideology, because they need reform, but they also need to stick to their principles. So there you go. But I'm sure that the wing of the reformist movement that was pivoting in a pro-U.S. direction, Rouhani and all of them, they're out of power for a long time. That completely blew up in their face. And I've given my analysis of this many times on these streams. Obama was really hoping that he could try to boost Rouhani and all of them to become Iranian Gorbachevs or Iranian Yeltsins, and it didn't work. And the Israeli establishment, Netanyahu, and the military-industrial complex in America and others, they just weren't going to let it happen because it cut into their profits. And that might have been a more effective strategy for U.S. imperialism in opposing Iran, but they couldn't have it. And so now Iran is much more solid, and the foundations of the Islamic Republic are well intact. And it goes to show you that to some degree or other, the needs of the system override any strategy the imperialists might have, right? They tried to implement this Rockefeller soft power strategy for destabilizing Iran. Didn't work. So there you go. Nate, if you can research this, maybe I can have you on to explain this. You probably know way more about this. Not probably, you do know way more about this than I do. Maybe if you can research this, I'll have you on as a guest at some point to explain what's coming up in the Iranian elections, because I don't know enough about the current situation there. So there we go. All right, now I scroll up again for the next super chat. Scrolling up. All right, we already did the Iran question. All right. Caleb, can you talk about the Jewish Holocaust being the foreground of other genocides the Nazis planned to carry out against Slavs and other groups? Well, they did. I mean, Roma people that are derogatorily called gypsies were slaughtered in mass by the Nazis. They were gassed. Poles were gassed. And they did, plan to completely genocide and slave labor. People forget that slave labor was a big part of the Nazi economy. What they did in the areas they conquered was they forcibly depopulated them, and they took the people back to Nazi Germany to be slave laborers. And that there were a lot of foreign slaves in Nazi Germany when the Soviet Union ultimately took Berlin. And that's an aspect of fascist economics. Like, in Japan, right, there were, millions of Korean slave laborers in Japan too. And that slave labor, conquering different territories and then depopulating them, taking the people out of there and taking them to be slave laborers. That was a big part of the fascist economic system. And that doesn't get discussed, right? But when the Nazis took over an area, they tended to depopulate it and bring the people back to Germany to be slave laborers. Yeah. So, right. There you go. There you go. And that they did commit genocide against Slavs. They slaughtered entire villages in the areas of the Soviet Union that they conquered. 27 million people in the Soviet Union died in World War II. That, yes, what was done to the Jews, the 6 million, the gas chambers, horrendous. And no one wants to belittle that or question that or tamper with that narrative. But at the same time, the Nazis were just very, very vicious to other groups as well. So, and we don't want to deny that either, right? So there we go. All right. Scrolling up. Okay, scrolling up. Next super chat question. Okay. And right. And I will tell people, is the next one of these I have to give people the speech again. That's okay. I understand people don't watch every night. I stream a lot, and you're not obligated to watch every show. But yeah, Battle Cossack asked me something, and somebody else later asked me something. I am not going to talk about certain people. Nothing good comes from me mentioning certain people or engaging with certain people. Okay? And I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just not going to go there. So just don't try. Okay? Right? The amount of viciousness that has been directed toward me personally from these people who supposedly agree with me, the amount of hate and personal attacks that have been leveled against our community and myself for no good reason. What would I gain from getting involved in drama with certain people? I'm not going to do it, right? Yeah, I'm not going to do it. This is for real. I'm building a real organization, not a social media brand. And, I don't benefit in any way from having a stupid internet flame war with people that can't seem to get along with anybody. All right. There are still some that believe that wokeism and identity politics are somehow a Marxist conspiracy to destroy the Western way of life. Yes. Right. And they're wrong. There are some elements in Marxism, that aesthetic, that rebellion aesthetic or whatever, that have been hijacked by wokeism. But ultimately, the Congress for Cultural Freedom and all of that is separate from genuine Marxism and socialism. And actually, the Soviet Union, as it existed, it became more socially conservative. And the communist world today is actually quite conservative. And this is a big point of CPI. And this is something we have to talk about, because there is an anti-woke blowback coming. That is coming. And they're trying to blame wokeism on China, which is absurd. China's not woke. Iran is not woke. Russia, Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, these countries are not woke, right? And the idea that wokeism is a communist conspiracy, I mean, genuine socialist countries aren't like that. Are there elements of Marxism that the woke people use? But this all goes back to, and I've talked on here about the 3 stages. Wokeism was a 3-stage process. First, you had the Congress for Cultural Freedom, right? And that was a movement that was created, that was created. It was funded by the American government to counter actual Marxism. They started funding what they called the anti-Stalinist left. They funded that to manipulate leftist politics. Then after that, you had the color revolutions and the color revolution apparatus, George Soros, and was dispatched around the world to foment uprisings in communist countries with these liberal NGOs that were about human rights and LGBT or whatever, and they would destabilize socialist countries. Wokeism is stage 3. It is those people coming back to the United States to try and control the United States. They first just started manipulating left-wing politics and funding a wing of Marxist and leftist socialist politics that was anti-communist against the Soviet Union and was more about individualism and rebellion, was not really about socialist economics. And then they did the color revolution stuff. And then the third layer is wokeism, and it's American intelligence. George Soros is not working for China. He hates China, right? George Soros wants to destroy China, right? And it is infuriating to me, the attempt to equate the obnoxious woke people with genuine communist governments. My video of the World Youth Festival, right? I think the algorithms must be kind of rigged, because it's weird, because I have never seen like that video. It's like, but the video of the World Youth Festival, it shows me and Tom and Noah. Noah is great in that video, by the way. Shout out to Noah. But the video that we just released of our involvement in the World Youth Festival, that shows you, I mean, that is not a woke festival, right? And that's the global communist movement. You see us there with the representatives of North Korea and with the Korean Workers' Party and with the Vietnamese, the Ho Chi Minh Communist Youth Union of Vietnam, and with various communist governments and anti-imperialists and the communists of Nepal and the Cuban they are not woke, right? It's a different thing entirely. All right, and I'm going to scroll up again. I appreciate the super chats, but I'm not going to create more drama by engaging with people who've been basically told to be hostile to me. I'm just not going to engage with people like that. I don't get anything out of it, right? I don't get anything out of it. So, all right. Next super chat. Just scrolling. Wait, did you say the lower levels of capital use McCarthyism to beat the Eastern establishment? Please explain. Absolutely. Go and read anything written by the John Birch Society, right? They thought the Rockefellers were communists, right? Joe McCarthy, the reason that he was censured by the U.S. Congress was because he was accusing the U.S. Army and Voice of America and the CIA of being communists. And they were talking about how the Kinsey report, the Rockefellers were funding social liberalism with the Kinsey report, and they were opposed to the Birth Control League. And yeah, the reason that Joe McCarthy was so widely condemned, he had been very popular for, in this popular anti-communist witch hunter, but he got condemned and eventually got censured by the Congress because he was mobilizing in the name of anti-communism to fight against the ultra rich. And he targeted the U.S. Army, and he targeted the Voice of America broadcast. He targeted the CIA, and ultimately, and he targeted Israel too. Joe McCarthy, right? I mean, and in fact, Hank Greenspun, who revealed that Joe McCarthy was gay, was probably a Mossad agent. He stole millions of dollars from the U.S. military, millions of dollars worth of military hardware. That doesn't make Joe McCarthy good. It means there was a division in the ruling class, and that McCarthy and later Barry Goldwater and the John Birch Society and what they call the old right, which laid the basis for the libertarians, mind you. The Libertarian Party is very much, it was a combination of hippie counterculture people and the old right. It was like the John Birch Society and hippies came together to form a party in the 70s. The Libertarian Party is largely, it was the lower levels of capital fighting the Eastern establishment. And, and the John Birch Society and what they called the old right was, yes, they were very much against. And they talked about Rockefeller Republicans that they hated. And, yes. And that's why Joe McCarthy was destroyed by mainstream media, even though they boosted him at first to fight communism, but then they fought him. And this is something that again, there's nuance to this, right? But there are divisions in the ruling class. And this is what chapter 4 of our new textbook is about. So there you go. All right. Scrolling up again. If anyone else has any more super chats, I've got it in me to go for a little while longer. So why is it not letting me scroll up? Now it's not even letting me scroll up. First of all, it's not showing me this. Oh, now it's going to let me scroll up again. No. Oh, now it's okay. Now I'm scrolling up. Okay. This is so frustrating. Okay. StreamYard is driving me up the wall, but that's okay. All right. They really need to fix this. All right. Scrolling down, right? Scrolling down, and just don't ask me about certain people, and you know who they are. Don't ask me about them. I'm just not going to do anything about them, right? Why? I gain nothing from that. All right. Aaron Bushnell was going to be deployed to take part in the genocide. That's why he did what he did. Yeah. And I don't think he's a bad person. And I see the whole thing as a tragedy, but I can't in good conscience promote it. Right. And just because, it's someone who's against what the USA is doing. Okay. Yeah. But I'm not going to promote suicide. I'm just not going to do it. Again, there's this, we celebrate anything that's against the establishment. No, I'm not like that. I want stability in the United States. And, I understand why he did what he did, and it's a tragedy, and he was a good person. He was a good person, no question about it. He was an anti-imperialist. He was opposed to U.S. support for Israel and all of that, but I can't be promoting that. And I mean, yeah, there you go. Okay, Dankbot, I can't respond to you for reasons I already stated above, so just don't ask me to, right? Did I see Trump's interview with Tim Pool? I saw the part where he said he was thinking about freeing Julian Assange. That I saw, which, in all honesty, I've got questions about that, because Donald Trump he's the guy who extradited Julian Assange. I mean, and he said he doesn't know who Julian Assange is. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he loved WikiLeaks when he was running, and it's interesting that Trump said that. And, I mean, let's find the clip. Let's put it on. I'm skeptical, right? I do think Trump is probably the lesser of two evils in the upcoming election. But Trump did a lot of awful things when he was president. And there's no reason to pretend that that's not the case. Trump did some pretty awful things. He murdered Qasem Soleimani. That was horrendous. And I don't pretend that was a good thing. And Donald Trump, the way he just kind of forgot who Trump is. And there's a friend of mine who was a Trump supporter, who was just the biggest supporter of Julian Assange. And I lost a lot of respect for him when all of a sudden he was against Assange. When Assange got extradited, he was like, oh, well, he broke the law. And I was just like, wait, hold up. And the way the Trump movement that had embraced Assange before suddenly, oh, well, Assange broke the law, he's bad. I mean, that was like alarm bells went off in my head. I was like, are you serious? And I lost respect for a lot of people in the Trump movement that I had thought were genuinely anti-establishment. And, the compromises people make, we all make compromises to some degree or other, but yeah, I support Assange, free Assange. And that was one of the great things of the Libertarian Convention. Saw so many people in free Assange shirts. All right, let's put the Tim Pool. This is Tim Pool interviewing Trump about Assange. Trump, for his own reasons. Well, let's watch the clip.
Will you pardon Julian Assange?
Well, I'm going to talk about that today, and we're going to give it very serious consideration. And we're going to have a couple of other things to say in the speech that I think you're going to love.
I've heard some rumors.
And you've gotten so much out of me, I should leave a little bit for the speech, don't you think?
Mr. President, it is an honor and a privilege. I really do appreciate you sitting
down with me. And you're very respected, I have to say. When I did a little research, and some of my guys said, and I've met you before, but they said just a very respected guy. It's my honor.
Interesting. There you go. Right. Well, he didn't say yes. He hinted that he might or something like that. But, I mean, whatever. The fact that Trump is even toying with that, again, he might forget about it the second he takes office. But the fact that Trump is even appealing to people about that it's a sign that Trump is trying to whatever degree or other to appeal to anti-establishment sentiments, right? That doesn't mean Trump is necessarily, even as president, he still appealed to those sentiments when he was president, and he did a very bad job as president. But, voting for Biden is a defense of the degrowth establishment. Voting for Trump is like a protest against it, even though, right? Even though, Donald Trump is very much, a part of the establishment and is going to rule in the way that he can. So there you go. There you go. All right. All right. Do we have any more super chat questions? Anything else people want to ask me about? And I see somebody just sent me something on Cash App, and I'm very appreciative about that. Thank you. But yeah, is there anybody else that has anything else they would like me to talk about tonight? Anything else that's on people's minds for this evening? I will say, folks, Angela McCurdle is my friend, and I don't know if you saw, but I had a chat. I had a chat with Angela McCurdle a few months ago where she talked to me for like an hour about communism, and she wasn't rude, and she listened to me. And I will link that in the chat. I don't want to tweet it out now because that won't help her right now, but she's been liking my tweets in the aftermath of the Libertarian Convention. She's been liking my tweets, and she's been, she's been very friendly. And I'm deeply moved, and she was very, very friendly to me at the convention itself. And she, gave me access to different things. And, that's great, right? That's great. Right. And that we have to make friends anywhere we can make them. Right. And that, the establishment has its fingers in different places. And there are certain people who've been told to treat us like enemies. And there are a variety of places, you know? And I don't want to focus on that. I don't want to focus on that, honestly, because it's not worth, yeah. And you're right. I mean, it could be, right? But I don't want to focus on the negativity. I want to focus on the fact that we will make friends anywhere we can make them. And I have found friends in some very strange places. I'll just tell you. And I'm grateful for that, because anywhere our community can find friends, we urgently need them. I've said on these streams, if we don't make friends here in America very soon, we're fucked, right? The government will find an excuse to throw us in jail. We need to make friends over here. We need to make allies over here, right? We've never broken the law. I've never broken the law. I'm just an American, but I understand imperialism, and I understand capitalism, and I understand that the only future my country can ever have, is being part of an anti-imperialist future. So there we go. But if you want to watch my, chat with Angela McCurdle, watch this. And I'm really glad to consider her a friend. And, she I had never met her before. We sponsored the Rage Against the War Machine rally, but I had never met her. And I will actually show you the clip because it's very moving. Right? This is my chat with Angela McCurdle. But you know what prompted the chat was the fact that I had never met her before. Okay? But yet she was baited over her ties to me. And she didn't throw us under the bus. And I will show you that clip on here. I can get it to show clips. I'm going to show you that clip because it's amazing, right? Angela she never met me. She didn't know anything about me, but she was being interviewed by this jackass named Joe Walsh, who was baiting the Libertarian Party. And he tried to basically get her to disavow CPI because we had supported the Rage Against the War Machine rally. And she said no, and she wouldn't throw me under the bus. Look at this. It's amazing, right? This is a real organizer here. This is somebody who really, really wants to get things done. I'll show you the clip. Right? This is Angela. We had never met before. We'd never spoken before. And I heard about it from other people.
Rage Against the War Machine rally that you had in February of this year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but man, oh man, Angela, when I look at who co-sponsored this event, who spoke at this event, it seemed like a pro-war, pro-Russia, pro-aggression rally. Why would you have fascists and communists and mouthpieces for Russia speaking at an event like this?
We invited people from multiple political backgrounds and perspectives to come and speak as long as they were anti-war.
Nick Brana, he's the chairman of the People's Party. He's a communist. He co-chaired this thing. He's not a communist. His Twitter feed.
But if he was, yeah.
Angela, his Twitter feed the past year and a half is full of nothing but pro-Russian propaganda.
Okay.
He blames the U.S., NATO, and Ukraine up and down the street. Never once blames Russia. Never once. Garland Nixon is a mouthpiece in the U.S. for Russian state media. Caleb Maupin is a communist. He's the founder of CPI,
he is.
One of the rally's sponsors that hosted a pro-Nazi rally. I could go on. There are like 15 speakers
Heaven
here.
forbid we take $1,000 from someone so we can have an appropriate sound system to put on our rally.
Wait a minute.
And what pro-Nazi rally have I ever hosted? Like, where did he get that from? I could sue his ass. Pro-Nazi rally, right? I mean, what is that, right? I mean, there's a Nazi rally. If I was a Nazi, maybe I'd host a Nazi rally. I'm not a Nazi, but what's a pro-Nazi rally? We are not Nazis, but we think Nazis are good. Come to our pro-Nazi rally. I mean, what is this? It's just the most retarded thing I've ever heard, right? But anyway.
go on. There are like 15 speakers.
Heaven
here.
forbid we take $1,000 from someone so we can have an appropriate sound system to put on our rally.
Wait a minute. We had, you're better than that. You let a guy like that, a pro-Russia, communist, fascist, whatever he is, speak because he gave
Maybe
you
I'll have a public conversation with him. Maybe I'll have a public conversation with him to talk about communism and his views.
But wait a minute. You just said that he gave you $1,000 for the event, so you let him speak?
I did. I mean, they were a sponsor.
It's so interesting because a common thread here is you don't want to judge and you don't want to necessarily weigh in, and you'll have an anti-war rally with an anti-war rally with a bunch of pro-war speakers. That is oxymoronic. That makes no sense, right? I know welcome all viewpoints, but at an anti-war rally, you had a litany of speakers who are pro-war.
You're pro-war. You're telling me right now you're pro-war. Oh, okay. Because they also say they're not pro-war, so that's very interesting.
No, a number of these,
it's almost like nuance kind of.
A number of these people identify. Scott Ritter.
He didn't speak at our rally.
He was invited to speak, correct?
He was invited to speak. He ended up not speaking.
Jackson Hinkle was a speaker. He writes constantly of how he wants Russia to win the war and take over all of Ukraine. Why would you allow a guy like that to speak at an anti-war rally?
Well, I certainly don't agree with that. I don't want Russia to take over all of Ukraine, and hopefully it won't. I was really glad that he came and brought an anti-war message when he did speak.
So there you go. Yeah, look at it. I mean, and she's very professional. She understood that, look, she's not going to play this game that they do in the internet world where, you're supposed to disavow everybody. You're supposed to denounce and disavow. I will not associate, don't play that game. Right. And that she's a professional. Now, I had another Rumble rant come in from Delta V, and he says, was there much impression of how libertarians feel about Javier Milei at the Libertarian Convention? I made a point of not talking to people about stuff like that. I was there to talk to people about Julian Assange, as you saw in the video. I was there to talk to people about opposing war and economic growth. I didn't ask people about that, but I heard nobody talking about it. I did not hear any mention of Javier Milei. What's interesting is a lot of the libertarians I know, they still have a libertarian outlook, but they want to trade with Russia and China. They're not supportive of the U.S. dollar. They like the BRICS. They're excited about the BRICS. So Javier Milei is very, very contrary to what most libertarians that I know's beliefs, even though, libertarians do believe in the free market nonsense, and they do share his, they appeal to his anti-communism, etc. And I've debunked Javier Milei on here, and I think that some of the libertarians are obligated. They feel, especially like people that hold positions in the party, they feel obligated to hail Javier Milei because he's the first elected libertarian head of state, and he calls himself a libertarian, and he is a head of state. Javier Milei is a degrowth fascist. I mean, he's just using austerity to degrow Argentina. He's doing it Pinochet style rather than doing it, Hitler style. Rather than using the state to forcibly degrow, he's just cutting funding for everything. But it's still degrowth is degrowth. I mean, the result is the Argentine economy is getting poorer. Poverty is soaring at this point in Argentina. So if libertarian economics of just cutting everything is going to make a paradise, why isn't it happening? Right. And, a lot of libertarians, like the BRICS, a lot of libertarians are very critical of the IMF and the World Bank. A lot of libertarians really like China because a lot of people are libertarian because they believe in economic growth. And that's why we wrote this pamphlet. Do you believe in growth? We wrote it because a lot of people are libertarian because they believe in economic growth. And that is something that it's very confused because right now communists are saying they're against growth because, communism in the American mind is associated with you're not allowed to get rich. You're not allowed to have money. And we're told that capitalism creates endless growth. Marx and all the other Marxists historically have said, no, capitalism does not create endless growth. And especially in a period of technological advancement, it creates a big problem. And that's why I wrote this whole pamphlet to explain it. Don DeBar, he read it. He sent me a message today. He read it on his way home from the Libertarian Convention. He said it was brilliant. He said he did not expect it to be as brilliant as he was. Don DeBar, who interviewed me, we had to cut our interview short, but I showed some of it in the Libertarian clip. He read this on the way home and he messaged me today. He was blown away by this pamphlet. He said it was one of the most brilliant things he'd ever read. And we have the book version. Carl Payne is currently laying out the book version. Yeah. Oh, wow. Joe Walsh there just tweeted that all Palestinians should be driven out of Gaza. That sounds like ethnic cleansing, Joe, right? Joe Walsh is calling me a pro-Nazi and he's on there advocating ethnic cleansing. So there you go. That's Joe Walsh. Good for Angela for standing up to him. But, my opening remarks tonight were pretty heavy. And I was just trying to get you all to understand strategic equilibrium is coming. And all we can do is prepare for strategic equilibrium. But I'm saying that differently than the people who said it to justify their inactivity, right? We're not going to win the social media game. But when shit hits the fan, social media is not going to fucking matter, right? We're headed for a strategic equilibrium. And we need all the friends we can have, and we need to prove that we can be useful to those friends, and we need to have a network of people who can get real shit done, and we need to be solid as a rock. That's what we need. Genuine divisions in the UK ruling class these days, both conservatives and Labour, are pro-degrowth, anti-Russia, anti-Chinese, and seriously anti-populist. Well, my understanding, Chas, and I don't understand British politics as well as American politics. My understanding is that there is a populist layer in Britain. There's the new right. And that also in Britain, because of the fact that, your politics have always been different, there is like a pro-growth left, that exists, right? And Jeremy Corbyn was a con man, and Jeremy Corbyn and the, Labour fooled around with them a little bit. But you do have people in the labor movement in Britain, and you do have, people in the Labor Party, and the Labor Party is a dead end. I'm not endorsing the Labor Party, but there are some pro-growth people in the Labor Party. And you do also have right-wing populists in the new right. You got George Galloway. He's pro-growth and he's pro-Russia and China. He's anti-imperialist. So British politics is a little more complex because in Britain, there's always been more of a left. That's why there's so many trots in Britain, because in Britain, there's more of a socialist tradition. They need the trots to confuse things and to manipulate things. Because there's more of an actual socialist movement. And in Britain, you have much more of a working class left that, is there. And so it's complicated. And you get a George Galloway who now has the Workers' Party, right? You get this, our comrades, our good friends, Joe T. Berard and CPG-BML. I mean, those are genuine anti-imperialist communists, right? And you also have some people that are still believe in the Labor Party. You had, what was his name? It was Tony Benn. For years, you had Tony Benn. And Tony Benn was, in the Labor Party. But Tony Benn was, a genuine, like an old school socialist, right? Who defended the Soviet Union and things like that. And he was just, he was an old school socialist, and he was in the Labor Party, and the Labor Party was no good. And so he was kind of leading the workers in a bad direction, but he was genuinely anti-imperialist. He interviewed Saddam Hussein. He supported the Palestinians, etc. And there was a wing of the Labor Party that was tolerated, that was somewhat anti-imperialist at some point. Right. Let me see if I can find a good clip of Tony Benn, right? To play. Right. Tony Benn. Let me see if I can find a clip of it. All right. This is Tony Benn talking about fight the cuts, right? Tony Benn was an old school social democrat. Right. And he was like a Labor Party social democrat, but he defended the Soviet Union and he defended Cuba, and he went and interviewed Saddam Hussein and defended Saddam Hussein, and that he and George Galloway, they they at one point were a wing of the Labor Party that was allowed to sound like genuine socialists. Now, the Labor Party has always been, a barrier to the working class movement, but part of maintaining the charade was they had to have people who sounded like socialists actually sound. Arthur Scargill, the leader of the miners' union in Britain, that guy was a communist. Still is. I think he's still alive. He's just very old now, but he's an old school communist. He defends Stalin. He's a member of the Stalin Society. He was friends with Gaddafi. He was a real deal communist. So there you go. Hold on. Here's Tony Benn. We'll put Tony Benn on, right? And that's one thing I do like British leftists a little bit better. I like listening to them because they have economic rhetoric, right? They don't sound like woke. They sound, they're much less new left influence. They've got much more of a class orientation.
For a long time. Comrades, I would like, first of all, to thank the organisers of this meeting for giving us one of the best evenings of political education that I've attended for a long time. The ingredients of what we've learned is, first of all, we've learned something of the Greek case and have had an opportunity of expressing our solidarity with them. And I hope reports of this meeting go back to Athens and elsewhere so they know that they are not alone and they have friends here. And that is absolutely essential. But also, we've learned about the relationship between what's happened to them and what is happening to the cabin crew of British Airways, what's happening to people at universities and elsewhere. And all of a sudden, we're coming up against the truth that globalization means the transfer of power from the people we vote for to the people who own the banks and have the appointed jobs and are not elected. And that is the lesson we have to learn at this period of history. It is a very, very important lesson to learn, because otherwise, bit by bit, we will find that what we have built up through democracy has been eroded. I try to understand, as I'm sure everybody does, what's going on, and I offer my conclusion. I think that just as for years the great political battle was to extend the vote so that the working people could vote, when the vote came, people could use the vote to buy with their vote what they couldn't afford with their purse. They bought the National Health Service by voting for it. They bought local government by voting for it. And now the attacks on the public services that we hear every day are attacks on those things that were purchased by the vote, i.e. it is another attack upon democracy itself. And I think if we understand that, then we shall be much, much clearer about what it is we're defending. We're not just defending the schools and the hospitals and all that. We are also defending the right of people to go to a polling station and without having a very fat wallet, with a pencil on a bit of paper, they can vote for a party that will provide that their needs may be met. And that, I think, is another lesson we have to not just learn from meetings like this, but preach to other people, because I think it makes a great deal of sense. Also, to recognize that we are engaged in a struggle which will illuminate the struggles of other people. You don't always win the battles you're in, but my God, if you look back over history, the number of people who fought battles and lost them, who have also in the process taught us how to fight battles, is also very important indeed. And my mind goes back, listening to the speakers tonight, to the Thatcher period, because I think at that time we didn't actually defeat Thatcher, but my God, we did learn a lot about what their plans were, how they operated them, what we were up against, and in the end, we have to deal with them, because Mrs. Thatcher understood the labour movement better than the labour movement itself. She understood that all that we had achieved, and we have achieved a great deal over the years, was by three things. First of all, by legalising trade unions so they could operate democratically to bring about their needs to be met. So she decided to attack the trade unions, the miners, the first attack, but it was more than that, to make trade unionism virtually illegal. Secondly, she attacked local government, because local government had played a very important part house building, council house building, education, and so on. And she wanted to destroy the role of local government as an instrument for progress. And so what she did was to attack the Lambeth and Liverpool councillors and gradually cramp the work of local government so they couldn't perform the function they had. And thirdly, of course, privatisation. She took assets and privatised them and used the money that she got from privatisation to fund her struggle with the miners and whoever it happened to be. And now privatisation is to be extended to include the post office, you probably saw. So you mustn't think that what we're seeing now is different from Thatcherism. It is Thatcherism coming into play at a different historical period, but with the same objectives to eliminate the labour movement and all that it stands for and all that we've heard tonight at the meeting. So the question is, what do we do about it? And that is the question. I am an optimist, but when I say that, I don't mean that if it'll all come all right in the end. I don't believe that at all. I believe that if you do organise, you will win. You look at the great victories we had recognising trade unions, votes for working class men, votes for women. All these things have been brought about by struggle. And therefore, we have to engage in a long, broad campaign, not just nationally, but internationally. And I say this because I was a Member of Parliament for Chesterfield, a mining constituency, elected the day the miners' strike began in 1984. And during that strike, we had mass support from all over the world, from the French unions, who gave £5 million for presents for the families of the miners who didn't have much at Christmas. We had American unions come over. And I heard one story from one of the American trade unions, which I tell you, and if you've heard me mention it before, it's because I think it's so important. It was a very simple story told by a group of trade union workers from America who'd come to support the British miners. And this is the story they told. They said there was a mining village and the pits were closed and a little boy fell down a mine shaft. And all the old men of the village gathered at the top of the mine, what shall we do? And they said, we'll drop a rope. So they dropped a rope, but it wasn't long enough. So they found a longer rope and they dropped that down, but it wasn't long enough. And they found another longer rope and they threw it down, but it wasn't long enough. And from the bottom of the mine shaft came a little boy, and the little boy's voice said, tie your ropes together. And I thought that was a really wonderful example of what solidarity is about. We have to tie our ropes with the Greek workers, with the cabin staff, with the academics who are facing cuts, with everybody facing cuts, and explain to people what is happening. Explain that it doesn't have to be as it is, and have confidence that if we do that, we shall succeed, as I am absolutely certain we will. Thank you for coming.
So there you go. And I thought while we're at it, since I'm not feeling particularly tired, and we just hit the 3-hour mark, but you know, I'll be on. If anyone's got any more super chats, by all means, throw them my way. But I'm going to put on a speech by Arthur Scargill, who was the leader of the miners' strike. This is a leader of the great miners' strike of 1984. And the way they broke the miners' strike was they baited Arthur Scargill for being a Stalinist and for being a friend of Gaddafi. This was Arthur Scargill, the great miners' leader, a communist leader of the miners' union in the 1980s.
This government tries to make out that we've got to compete in a totally unfair and unreasonable economic situation. How can it possibly be right to produce the cheapest coal in the world in terms of deep mining, only to be told that governments abroad gift to their industries between 20... She was successful in the Falklands, but she'll lose this battle. If 2 years ago, members of this union had been prepared to listen not to the National Coal Board figures, or to the government's figures, or to the media, had they listened to what I Nottinghamshire. I've got the Coal Board's own figures, which shows in North Notts they've lost 65% of production. In South Notts, approaching 50% loss of production. And this bunch, in the media and the government and the board, have the audacity to say that they're working normally. The only way that we can say that we don't believe them is to show clearly that we're going to increase our determination. And I would say to every Notts miner, examine your conscience. When the Conservative government supports you, the Daily Express, ITV and BBC, there's something radically wrong with the position. There's something wrong with the situation. There's something wrong with the situation where they require 10,000 police in order to ensure that certain members can go through picket lines. Not only are the words of Dennis Skinner right in terms of attitudes, but when they talk to us about guaranteeing the right to work, there are 4.5 million people who want the right to work and have every right to work. Ironic that when the NUN call upon the members to take strike action and stop work on a temporary basis to ensure the right to work, we're called mindless militants. When McGregor threatens to throw into the dole queue 70,000 of our members on a permanent basis, this bunch from the media described that as good business sense. Well, I've got news for them. Not only are we not prepared to see men thrown on the dole queue, but we want a shorter working week. We want early retirement so that our sons and our daughters can have the right to a job in this industry. Said, there is a new dimension, a new phenomena in this dispute. Everyone was predicting, who were in opposition, that the strike would crumble within a day or a week. But what's happened to our young miners? The youngsters in this union have shown that they are the finest example in the entire history of the miners' union. And the way they've stood firm is an inspiration to us all. On Saturday, I was privileged, along with Jack Taylor, to take part in one of the most historic and momentous demonstrations I've ever seen. 10,000 women, working women in the industry, and miners' wives demonstrated in South Yorkshire against the pit closure programme. The women are on the march, not merely to work in kitchens, they're on our picket lines fighting with us. within a matter of 8 to 9 weeks. The only thing that keeps them afloat is the supply, albeit limited, that they get from the Notts coalfield. In the coal industry itself, the stock position has dramatically deteriorated. Make no mistake, we're on a winner. And I'm telling you this, if we've got to stop out, well, November or December, we'll beat this coal board and go on.
Yeah, that was Arthur Scargill, the leader of the British miners' strike of 1984, which was a very, very big deal. I mean, people died on the picket lines, and, you know, it was kind of a turning point, you know, as the Thatcher government was trying to break the labor unions. But anyhow, I don't think folks have any more questions. I do appreciate you all. But yeah, those were kind of important remarks about strategic equilibrium. But keep in mind what we're doing with CPI. We're moving towards strategic equilibrium. We're trying to make friends anywhere we can make them. And we're trying to solidify our organization so that when the crisis comes, we can carry out operations. And there's a million attempts to break apart this organization. There's a million attempts to pull the group apart, to incite people against each other. You have to make a decision. You're not going to fall for that. You have to make a decision that you want to be part of a real group that in the real crisis will be able to get real shit done. And if you're just content to be, you know, on the internet, you know, then you're not going to make history, and you can make history. And I think a lot of people, what's really been lost is really the understanding that we could win. We could win, right? Right now, people don't seem to understand that we could win. There's a feeling that being a communist is just a kind of social media performance because we couldn't win, but we can win. And in fact, we're entering a period where we could really win. But what's important now more than ever is we need to build up networks of people who can rely on each other and can work and get things done. And so I gave you my opening speech about where I'm at. So on that note, folks, I'm going to put on the closing music. I'll probably be back tomorrow night. Don't know why I wouldn't be. I'll be back tomorrow. And yeah, all my best. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.